Wells, speaking from London. Here in the grim stone structure in the Thames, which houses Scotland Yard, is a warehouse of souvenirs. A warehouse where everyday objects, a hammer, a suitcase, a shirt button, all are touched by murder. You take this canvas bag.
This canvas bag might give us a lead, sir.
What's that writing on it, Sergeant?
It's the name of a local merchant, J. Gregory, Northampton.
Well, today, that canvas bag can be seen in the Black Museum.
From the annals of the Criminal Investigation Department of the London Police, we bring you the dramatic stories of the crimes recorded by the objects in Scotland Yard's Gallery of Death, the Black Museum.
Well, here we are in the Black Museum. Scotland Yard's Museum of Murder. Yes, here lies death. All the ways and means of death. Guns, of course, abound in plenty, but there are other simpler objects, things that were never meant for murder. Now, this gold trophy. A famous sportsman climaxed a great career by winning this. Later, it was an exhibit in his trial. It was proved he had used it to batter a man to death. Here's a knitting needle, perhaps used to knit for absent friends, for children not yet born. And it was put to more lethal use, to end a life. Here we are. Here's the canvas bag. It was once a bag used to hold provisions in a Northampton grocery store. Later on, it became more famous, but we anticipate. Let's begin the story not with the canvas bag, but with a certain young woman who at her home in Birmingham was packing her suitcases.
Here's another dress, Mary.
Oh, thanks, Mother.
And your slippers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that must be all.
Let's just have another look round. You don't want to forget anything.
No, that's right.
Oh, here you are, just as well I looked. Some stockings.
Oh. Well, I think that's all.
Yes.
I'll just lock my suitcase.
Mary?
What, Mother?
Are you sure you'll be all right?
Oh, of course.
It seems such a strange arrangement, you going all the way to London alone.
But what's strange about it? Tom's working in London, saving for our passages to Canada. He can't come to fetch me.
Travel all that way alone. Oh, Mary, let me come with you.
No, Mother. I'm not a child.
You're an almost married woman, but that doesn't mean your mother still can't worry about you.
Mother, really. Look, I'll be perfectly all right. Tom and I are getting married when I reach London. A month later, we'll be on our way to Canada.
And we'll lose you. It's so sad. You'll write as soon as you reach London, won't you, darling?
Yes, of course I will. And don't worry, please. I'll be all right.
A girl leaving home to get married, an anxious mother. Nothing very new about that, except that the girl never went to London. The following day, her train arrived in Northampton, where she was tenderly greeted by a charming man some years older than herself.
Hello. Hello. Here I am, Mary. My dear Mary.
Oh, darling. I've been waiting here for a moment. I thought you...
What, that I might have deserted you? Hardly, my sweet. Did you have much trouble with your family?
Yes, a little. Dad was anxious, and you know what Mother is. She worries terribly.
Yes. You told them the story about meeting Tom in London.
Uh-huh. They believed it.
Oh, good.
Oh, darling, it's wonderful to be with you.
Come, Mary. I found lodgings in St. John Street.
Oh, good.
But listen, since you've told your parents you were meeting Tom Reynolds in London, we might as well continue the deception, eh?
How?
Well, to the landlady, you'll be Mrs. Reynolds. And I, of course, shall be Mr. Reynolds. It might be better if you called me Tom.
The landlady found Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds a charming couple, so devoted, so very much in love.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Mr. Reynolds. I wrote to you about a room.
Oh, yes, Mr. Reynolds. I was expecting you today, just like you said in the letter.
And this is my wife, Mary.
Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Reynolds. I expect you'd like to see the room right away.
Yes, I would.
Well, if you'll just follow me. There's only one flight of stairs.
Let me carry the bag, dear. It's too heavy for you.
All right.
Have you any idea how long you'll be staying, Mr. Reynolds?
Well, I can't tell you at the moment. It depends on circumstances, doesn't it, sweetheart?
Yes, dear.
Why, it's Mr. Reynolds. I didn't know it was so late.
Well, my wife's asleep, Mrs. Marsh. I thought I'd just pop in to tell you that we're leaving next week.
Leaving?
Uh-huh.
Well, isn't that rather unexpected? I was talking to Mrs. Reynolds only yesterday, and she said...
Yes, but you see, I've had some news from friends of mine in Canada.
In Canada?
Yes. We're going to Canada, Mrs. March.
Oh.
We're leaving from Liverpool next week.
Oh, that will be nice for you, Mr. Reynolds, and for your sweet wife, too.
Yes. Oh, but there is one other thing.
Huh?
I'd be very glad if you wouldn't say anything of this to my wife. You see, she's not quite sure that she really wants to go to Canada, and, well, I think it'll only upset her if anyone talks to her about it.
Of course. I wouldn't breathe a word, particularly since you've asked me not to.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Marsh. We'll be giving up our room on Friday. I'll arrange for a car to call for the luggage early in the day.
So considerate, the landlady thought. Such a gentleman. On Friday morning, she said goodbye to the couple with reluctance. At least she said goodbye to Mr. Reynolds, who explained that his wife had gone ahead to the railway station. But even the nicest of lodgers are only a passing memory in a landlady's mind, and she might never have thought of the young couple again if it hadn't been for the events that occurred some weeks afterwards. On the high road from Rugby to Northampton, two men were walking home after work.
Well, Bat, what do you think of the team's chances on Saturday?
They're wanted to be better than last week, eh, Sam?
Yeah, I should say so. Hey, look down there in the ditch beside the road. What do you see?
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, it looks like a canvas bag.
Ah, well, there's something inside it. Ah, well, what's that all over it? Lime, isn't it?
Oh, probably a dead dog. Come on, I'll buy you a pint.
Yeah. Hey, ain't no dead dog. Bert, look, will you? An arm. I can see it plain.
Oh, crikey. Come on, Sam.
Aye.
This is for the police.
Yeah.
The local police recovered the body and Scotland Yard was summoned. Inspector Courtney, accompanied by Detective Sergeant Finlay, arrived in Northampton. They met the doctor who had conducted the post-mortem.
The body was that of a woman, Inspector.
Have you any idea of her age, Doctor?
Youngish. I'd say in her 20s. In height, a little over 5 feet. Slight build.
And in what state was the body?
Dismembered and partially decomposed.
And the cause of death? Have you any idea about that?
There's no way of telling, Inspector. The only thing you can take for granted is that she was murdered.
The yard men had a dual task there. They had to track down the murderer, but first and foremost, they had to find out who had been murdered. They set out to examine the evidence.
This canvas bag might give us a lead, sir.
Yes. Now, what's that writing on it, Sergeant?
It's the name of a local merchant, J. Gregory, Northampton.
Yes, the name's clear enough. Luckily, the lime didn't rot it away.
As I'd say it was meant to, sir.
Yes, I'd say so too, Sergeant. I think we'll call on Mr. Gregory.
Was this a lucky break early in a difficult case? It seemed not. For when the London detectives interviewed J. Gregory in his Northampton warehouse, the merchant could give them little help.
Yes, it's my bag, all right, Inspector. No mistaking that, but how did it get in there?
Well, we thought you might be able to tell us that.
Well, I assure you I can't. These canvas bags are used for transporting groceries between this warehouse and my several shops in the town.
And they're, handled by your employees?
Yes.
Are they ever given out to the public?
Oh, no, they're not.
Were you aware that one was missing?
Well, hardly, Inspector. I have upwards of 100 of these bags and a lot more to do than count them.
Yes, of course, yes. But now, you understand the gravity of this situation.
Yes.
A woman has been found dead. Murdered.
Murdered?
Her body wrapped in one of your bags.
Inspector, I can only assure you I know nothing whatever about it.
At this stage, Mr. Gregory, not knowing the identity of the murdered woman, the bag is our only clue. Now, you do appreciate that?
Yes, of course.
Sir, that I'd like to talk to one of your employees who might have handled these bags and who might have been in the position to take one or even give one to somebody else.
Inspector, I'll see to it my staff are available for you.
Thanks.
As a matter of fact, you can begin with my warehouse manager, my own brother.
Oh, yes, thank you, yes.
Wait, I'll get him. George?
Huh?
George, come here, will you?
Presently, the obliging Mr. Gregory returned with his brother, the warehouse manager. He, too, was courteous and polite to the detectives, and only too ready to answer the questions they asked him.
Now, where do you live, Mr. Gregory?
In Birmingham. 7 High Street, Birmingham.
And are you married?
Yes. Wife and 2 children.
And you live at home?
Well, sometimes I stay here at the warehouse. You know, because of the distance involved in travel, you understand?
Oh, yes, perfectly. Now, tell me, have you ever lent or given anyone outside the firm one of these canvas bags?
Well, I don't like to mention it, but...
Well, go on, George. Tell the inspector whatever he wants to know. Did you give away one of these bags?
Well, yes, as a matter of fact, I did, John. I know it was against regulations, but, well, a tramp came in one day asking for some scraps of food, and...
Yes, and...
I felt sorry for him, you know how it is.
Yes, quite.
I gave him a couple of tins and a canvas bag to carry them in. Sorry, John, but that was the only occasion I have given one away.
Now, could you tell me how long ago would this have been?
Oh, I suppose about 6 weeks. Perhaps a bit longer. I'm afraid I can't remember the exact date.
Well, thanks very much, Mr. Gregory. I don't suppose you can help us in this matter of the murdered woman. I mean, you've no idea who it might be.
None whatsoever, Inspector. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. Good day to you. Good day.
The inspector left the warehouse deeply disappointed. It seems that the trail led nowhere. For the inspector believed this story of the tramp that George Gregory had told him. There's no reason why he should not have believed it. But today, evidence that proved the lie can be seen in the Black Museum. There are hundreds of women reported missing every year throughout England. Now to the local police stations throughout the land, the messages went out in a long and slow search to find the identity of the murdered woman.
Desire information on any woman reported missing within past 2 months. Special attention to young woman about 5 feet in height, of slight build, well-dressed.
In answer to your inquiry, we've checked all missing persons approximating to the description given in the Glasgow area during the last 2 months. There are 3 missing persons whose descriptions might fit the one given, and further investigation is being made in each case. I shall report further within the next 7 days.
Hello, sir. This is Scotland Yard. We've been looking into your inquiry, and we find that in the London area there are 27 cases of missing persons. That would seem to justify investigation in relation to your inquiry. From preliminary inquiries, 13 of these cases can already be discounted. On the remainder, further inquiries are still being made. We'll be in touch with you later, sir. Goodbye.
Reports came flooding into Scotland Yard. The leads faithfully followed. Dead ends, all of them. The investigation into murder was bogged down because nobody knew who had been murdered.
Here's another one, Inspector. People by the name of Wilson in Birmingham. Worried about their daughter.
Oh, I never knew there were so many youngsters who run away from home. Well, still, have it checked, Sergeant.
Right, sir.
Another patient inquiry begins. When did your daughter leave home? Where was she going? Have you heard from her? The questions were asked, the answers were written down, and the result was sent to Scotland Yard.
Wilson, yes. Number 9 High Street, Birmingham. Left for London to marry a young man named Tom Reynolds.
Seems like she didn't get there, sir.
The family had a letter from Reynolds, just a sort of friendly note, no mention of the girl.
I understand young Reynolds went to Canada, sir. He was once engaged to the girl, but they broke it off.
Oh, yes?
The next thing, when he was in London, the girl had a letter from him asking her to marry him and go out to Canada.
Yes, but did the family see the letter?
No. It was all pretty hurried. They were upset, but she seemed to be able to get her own way.
Oh, I've heard this kind of thing before. Now, I wonder who the man was.
Not Tom Reynolds, that's certain. His letter to the family is enclosed there, sir.
Oh, let's see it, will you? Yes, wait a minute. Now, rough crossing, how is everyone? Miss my old neighbors. No, he doesn't mention her. Now, what was her name?
Mary, sir.
Mary Wilson, 9 High Street, Birmingham. Sergeant, that seems familiar.
To me, too, sir. I can't quite place it,
Wait a minute, I've got it.
What, Inspector?
George Gregory, that warehouse manager. His address is 7 High Street, Birmingham.
Number 7? Well, that means he lives next door.
Patience had paid off again. Careful and painstaking methods had given them a new lead, or rather, the renewal of an old lead. For the canvas bag had first led them to the Gregory warehouse. The detectives went back to Northampton, back to interview George Gregory.
Mary Wilson, Inspector? Well, of course I knew Mary Wilson.
Now, tell me, when did you last see her, Mr. Gregory?
Oh, some time ago. She went to Canada, you know. She married a young chap named Reynolds.
Yes, but did she marry him?
Oh, to the best of my knowledge, she did.
You said, I knew Mary Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
Why the past tense?
I don't know. Well, don't you always use the past tense when you're not likely to see a person again?
Oh, you don't think you'll see her again?
Well, Inspector, with her married and living in Canada, that'd hardly be likely, Inspector.
George Gregory seemed at ease. His answers rang true. It could be nothing but a strange coincidence. Inspector Courtney gave certain instructions.
I want a cable sent to Tom Reynolds in Canada. Find out if he married Mary Wilson or not. The odds are he's still single.
Then Courtney went to Birmingham, to number 9 High Street, where he talked to Mary's mother.
I don't want to alarm you, Mrs. Wilson, but I'm from Scotland Yard, and I want to make certain inquiries.
Scotland Yard? Oh, my Mary's done nothing wrong, has she?
Of course not. No. Now, tell me, Mrs. Wilson, do you really think your daughter might have gone to Canada with her young man?
Oh, I don't know what to think, sir. I was always puzzled. I mean the way she seemed to patch things up with Tom.
Yes. Did you question that?
No, I didn't say much. I was glad, really.
About her marrying the young man?
Yes. Well, you see, for a while I was worried there was another man she seemed to like. But too much, if you know what I mean.
Oh, you disapproved?
Oh, Mary was never one to take criticism, but I didn't like it, I can tell you.
Was the other man older?
He was, old enough to know better. Him with a wife and 2 children of his own. I tell you, I was relieved when I thought Mary was going away to marry Tom Reynolds.
Now, there's one more question I must ask you, ma'am.
Yes, Inspector?
The name of this attentive gentleman.
Well, I don't like to make anything of it, mind.
No, but I'd like to know his name.
Well, he happens to live next door, and his name is George Gregory.
We've had a reply to your Canada cable, sir.
Okay, Sergeant, go ahead and read it.
Tom Reynolds is living in Ottawa. He's a bachelor. Last time he saw Mary Wilson was in Birmingham 3 months ago.
What about his letter from London?
There was no letter from London.
It was beginning to add up. Point by point, link by link, a chain of circumstantial evidence was being forged. Forged by the patient police.
I think he's our man, Sergeant.
And imagine it, sir. He's been here under our noses since the very first clue you picked up.
Yes, the canvas bag. Let us write to him. But we haven't tied it up yet.
What's the next move, sir?
Mary Wilson left for London to meet Reynolds.
Or so it seems she told her parents.
Yes, it seems more than likely, sir, that they came here. So they must have lived somewhere, she and the man she met.
Now the detectives went through the town, front streets and back streets, fashionable hotels and cheap boarding houses. They went wherever there was a sign, rooms to let.
Well?
We're from Scotland Yard, ma'am. We're inquiring about a young couple who might have stayed here some 6 weeks to 2 months ago.
No, not here. I only take regulars. I'd all my boarders for the past 12 months.
Thank you, ma'am. Sorry to have troubled you.
They ran the whole gamut of landladies. The suspicious landladies, the mean, the garrulous landladies, the kind, the generous, the curious. Then in a lodging house in St. John's Street, their work paid off.
A young couple? Yes, I've had a few. What was their name?
We're not sure what name they might have been using.
Oh, you mean Crooks? Well, let me see. Oh, it couldn't have been that nice young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds. Now,
What was that name?
Reynolds.
Tom Reynolds?
Yes, I believe it was. Such a nice man. Oh, and his young wife was named Mary. She was awfully sweet.
Mrs. Marsh, can you give me a description of Mary Reynolds?
Why, yes, I think so. Short, about 5 feet tall, brown hair, rather pretty.
Yes.
Not much help, I'm afraid. I can't remember any other details.
Oh, you helped a lot, thanks. And the man?
Tall, dark hair, and a small mole on his left cheek, older than her. Oh, but he was very nice indeed. Oh, surely they couldn't have done anything wrong.
Mrs. Marsh, can you, I wonder, attend the police station tomorrow morning at 10?
Me? Why, sir?
Well, we'll be having an identification parade at 10 sharp.
All right, quiet, everyone. I've got together a group of 8 people, Inspector.
Thank you, Sergeant. Mrs. Marsh, I want you to try and identify the man you knew as Tom Reynolds.
All right, Inspector, but really, I know he and his wife went to Canada.
Nevertheless, if you don't mind, just walk slowly down the line and examine each man.
Eight men. A couple of detectives, 2 men taken out of the cells, 1 recruited off the street, and in the middle of them, a protesting, indignant George Gregory.
It's not this man. No, this. No, not him either. Why, Mr. Reynolds!
Gregory, grab him, man!
I got him!
There were enough policemen present to overpower the hastily departing Mr. Gregory, who was immediately arrested on a charge of having murdered Mary Wilson. Today, the evidence that brought about his downfall, the canvas bag that first directed police attention to him, occupies a place of honor in the Black Museum.
Orson Welles will be back with you in just a moment.
George Gregory killed a woman, he said, because she was too much in love with him to let him go. But he couldn't afford the scandal that might arise if he continued his association with her. Not a very nice reason, but then, the reason for murder seldom are. Anyway, George Gregory was tried and convicted and paid for his crime one morning at 8 o'clock. And now, until we meet next time in this same place for another story about the Black Museum, I remain, as always, obediently yours.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London. The Black Museum, a repository of death, a repertorium of violence. Here in the grim stone structure on the Thames, which houses Scotland Yard, is a warehouse of homicide, where everyday objects, a teacup and its saucer, a lady's parasol, a surveyor's chain, all are touched by murder. You take this mallet. It's a familiar object, a wooden mallet, worn, got a wooden head, marked, necked with all its uses. Maybe you have one in the cellar, in the forgotten tool chest at the bottom of your closet, in the toolbox of your car. But I doubt if you would care to own this one.
Hello. Here's something, Constable.
Just an old mallet, Sergeant.
Yes, notice the grease on it. And these. They look a bit like hair, don't they? Human hair.
Well, anyway, today, the mallet can be seen in a very special place of honor, in the Black Museum.
From the annals of the Criminal Investigation Department of the London Police, we bring you the dramatic stories of the crimes recorded by the objects in Scotland Yard's Gallery of Death, the Black Museum.
Well, here we are, the Black Museum. Scotland Yard's very special, very particular museum of murder. Here lies death. Row on row of cabinets. And in the cabinets, each in its place, each with its simple white card detailing victim and killer, time and place. The weapons, many of which you couldn't conceive as weapons, line these stone walls. Now here, for instance, this is a woman's handkerchief, a bit of lace at the edges, crumpled yellowish with age, yet stuffed as a gag in its owner's throat. It stifles screams, this handkerchief, and the sound of death. Here, a length of heavy chain. Once this chain enclosed a rich man's driveway. It was wrapped around his legs another time. It weighted his body in his private lake until the grappling hooks took hold. And here we are. The mallet. Little white card says, in part, Guy Fawkes Day, bonfire night. Guy Fawkes Day. It's November 5th. It's an old English tradition, you know. The celebration of Mr. Fawkes's attempt to blow up the House of Commons, the English House of Congress, almost 350 years ago. Every November 5th, bonfires of all sizes are to be found on the English countryside as part of this celebration. And that's why, you see, no particular attention was paid to a particular bonfire near a highway in Northampton one November 5th. Although one fellow did comment,
Quite a blaze, that one, eh, Davy?
Yeah, flames the feet 15, 20 feet. Silly to build a fire that big way out of here.
Well, maybe the fellas wanted London to see it, eh?
Well, really don't do it all, eh?
You see, I'll be guilty for that. Don't. Now listen, Holmes. Yes, a man running up the road, past the two fellas trudging home.
Hey, mister, anyone at that bonfire?
Didn't look in a hurry, getting on to town.
Yeah, I say, he's troubling. Think he's going to catch a train here about this time of night. Might as well save his breath and walk.
Too bad if he'd been walking. If Marty and Davy hadn't been on the road just then, if the fire hadn't been quite so spectacular, even for Guy Fawkes' bonfire night, if. However, the ifs don't count. Davy was a touch curious about that bonfire now, as he and his friend came almost abreast of the blaze.
Mighty big fire. Think we ought to take a look, Marty?
Oh, I'm tired. Fella said there wasn't nobody over there.
He didn't. Said he didn't look. Well, I'm going to. If those sparks get into the trees, we can have trouble, the wind and all.
Oh, all right. Have it your own way. Yeah, blimey. You can feel the heat right over here.
Here, that's no bonfire. It's a car burning. Here, we got to get help. This will make trouble. Come on.
The two men dashed for town in the wake of the man who passed them, and there in the village, they found the local police constable. Quickly, they gathered tools left over from the day's bombing and buckets, stirrup pumps, and raced back to the fire in the constable's old car. They didn't waste talk at the scene. In a matter of minutes, the blaze was under control. A few minutes more, and they could get close enough to see into the car, or see into what was left of it.
Not too close, men. There's a lot of heat there.
Here, constable, point that flashlight over there.
Where?
To the right. No, more to the right. The front seat. Looks like a bundle of rain.
Oh, that's no bundle. That's what's left of a man.
Charred, blackened, a twisted heap, but still recognizable as the body of a man. When the first shock was past, the local police constable ordered the men to stand watch while he telephoned. Before dawn, the experts were on the job.
All right, Sergeant. What have we got so far?
Number of the car, sir, MU2489. Some fragments of the clothing, garter buckles, belt buckles.
Mm-hmm.
A few pieces of cloth. That's about all, Inspector.
Yeah, not much to go on. Oh, well, maybe pathology will give us something. Meanwhile, trace the registration, find the owner, search the area around here carefully. Routine, Sergeant. Let me know.
Yes, sir. The usual.
Now then, you two.
Yes, sir.
I see. About this fellow who passed you running away from here. What did he look like?
Well, it was pretty dark last night, sir.
Well, he had no hat on.
Yes, sir. Monty's right. No hat, but a top coat and a briefcase.
I see. Anything else? Notice his hair? Well, it were dark. Seemed like a lot of it, sort of a round face.
You couldn't see his eyes or anything like that.
How old do you think he was?
Well, he was running pretty fast, like.
Well, nobody over 35 could run like that with a coat on and all. Well, unless he's been an athlete, of course. Oh, well, no matter about that. Anything else you remember about him?
Not me, sir.
Here, Inspector, do you think he had something to do with this? We're not ready to think yet. First, the facts have to be gathered. We'll get out this fellow's description. He may recognize himself and offer to help. Meanwhile, we'll find the owner of the car. A great deal of...
The fellow didn't offer any help. All the newspapers carried his description, but there were no results. The number of the car did bring results, however, and the person of a youngish woman who gave her name as...
Nora Williams. It was my husband's car. He works as a salesman for a firm in Northampton. He's on the road a lot. He set out this time on the 4th.
There's no use your viewing the remains, Mrs. Williams, but perhaps you can identify these.
What are they?
Garter buckles, a belt buckle.
Oh, that's all that was left?
Are they familiar to you, Mrs. Williams?
No, not at all. My husband never wears a belt, only braces.
I see. Mrs. Williams, was your husband on his way to his firm, the home office, so to speak?
I don't know.
Oh, he didn't say?
No, and I called the firm. They said they didn't expect him until next week.
Williams, Robert Williams, owner of the burned car. He never wore a belt. His firm didn't expect him for a week. Interesting. Maybe not quite as interesting as the little scene in progress under the wreck of the burned car.
Hello. Here's something, Constable.
Just an old mallet, Sergeant.
Yes, notice the grease on it? And these. They look a bit like hair, don't they? Human hair. There it is, Inspector. Found it about 10 yards from the wreckage.
Oh, just an old mallet?
No weathering of the paint.
Yeah. Grease, bits of hair. How far was it from the petrol tin?
Just a few feet. Another few steps away, that scorched area began.
Oh, the main area, or that sort of trail we found burned through the weeds?
The trail, sir.
Yeah. You're reconstructing something, Sergeant. Let's have it.
Well, sir, suppose that someone hit Williams with the mallet and drove the car off the road.
Mm-hmm.
Then threw some petrol from the tin on the car and laid a kind of trail of it until the tin was empty.
Yes.
This party might have tossed away the mallet, dropped the tin, and thrown a lighted match onto the gasoline. It's possible, Inspector.
Yeah. You may be closer than you think. Pathology reports that the man who died had been drinking heavily, and that the bits of cloth we found had been soaked in petrol.
Soaked in it, sir? And not burned?
The cloth came from the armpits of the dead man's jacket.
Soaked to the armpits in petrol. Whoever wanted Williams out of the way was thorough, to say the least.
Yes, but we don't know yet, Sergeant, if the corpus delicti is Williams. All we know is that Williams is missing, and his burning motor car contained a corpse.
Yes, sir. But if the body isn't Williams, then our missing man...
Maybe Williams, and maybe a murderer. Well, we'll see.
There wasn't much to see. No Williams, no identity for the corpse, just a few bits of blackened metal, funny-looking mallets, a patrol tin, a bit of scorched earth, a pathologist's report, but no Williams. That was all. And then, quite suddenly, there was a plethora of Williams.
My name is May Williams. I haven't heard from my husband for 3 days. It's not like Robert. We were married in May. He wanted it then because my first name is May.
I'm Dorothy Williams. I married Robert Williams 2 years ago. Our home's in Brixton. I have a little boy, Robert Jr., of course.
I left the hospital to come here, Sergeant. Our son was born just 2 weeks ago. He's our second child. Robert and I have been married 3 years. He was at the hospital on Guy Fawkes Day just before he left on his trip. I can hear him saying, "Now, Elizabeth, don't you worry. I'll be back in 5 days."
I interviewed Mrs. Williams myself, Sergeant. Her first name is Nora.
I know it seems incredible, Inspector, so I checked the records first. Every one of these women is married to a Robert Williams, and every one of them says the license number of his car was MU2489.
Yeah, 4 of them. London, Brixton, Greenwich, and Bournemouth. And 3 children. What have we here, Sergeant? Motive for murder or suicide?
And that mallet can be found today in an honored position in the Black Museum. Inspector Lorch and Sergeant Bradden found themselves of a common, if curious, state of mind. There was the very human and male tendency towards some small admiration for a man who could keep 4 wives reasonably happy, when most men have their difficulties with one. And there was the very stern necessity of finding this Robert Williams, who disappeared apparently into thin air, or who'd been burned to death on bonfire night in a blazing automobile. However, Inspector Lorch and Sergeant Bradden had something to work with now. They had 3 wives. The first one to be questioned was Dorothy Brixton.
What can you tell me of his usual route in his business, Mrs. Williams?
Nothing much, Inspector. Robert never talked business much at home.
Oh, what then, Mrs. Williams?
What then? Oh, what did he talk about?
That's right.
Oh, pleasant things, the cinema, football matches. He was a great one on sports. And after a while, he liked to talk about the baby. Bob is only 6 months old, you see.
Yes. Was there any regular time he was at home, like the 1st and 3rd weeks of the month, for instance?
No, sir. He'd be at home when he could. It was a bit difficult at first, getting used to that, but I managed. And he's so regular with the household money. Every Monday morning in the mail if he isn't at home.
By cheque, Mrs. Williams?
No, sir. By money order. Or in cash, sir.
Have you cashed in the last money order? Would you know where it was drawn?
No, I can't say, sir. I never took notice of that. Oh, Inspector.
Nothing much there. Nothing much except a picture of a quiet, rather shallow fellow interested in sports. It was Sergeant Braddon who took on May Williams. May Williams. She was young and quite pretty and very frightened.
To you, Mrs. Williams, 3 days is a long time.
Like 3 years, almost. He wrote me every night he was away. Now... Oh, Sergeant, that wasn't my Robert in that car, was it?
We don't know. Not yet, anyway. Suppose it wasn't. Suppose your husband has just disappeared.
Oh, he'd never do that. Robert's a wonderful man. Athletic, thick dark hair and a round face, almost like a boy's.
That much tallies with the man on the road, at any rate. We hope we can help you find your husband, Mrs. Williams.
Elizabeth Williams is no fool, and a newborn baby can be quite a problem when your only means of economic support has disappeared.
You see, Inspector, he told me this trip was taking him to Kent, and now the car's turned up in Northampton. Well, you can see why I'm so worried.
And under those circumstances, of course.
I never questioned Robert very much about his trips. I guess I was too glad to see him home. And he never stayed long enough to wear out his welcome. Ours wasn't a slippers and pipe kind of existence.
And do you have many friends in your neighbourhood there in Bournemouth?
I do. Robert never cared to go out much.
I see. Well, for a man of about 35, that doesn't seem, well, too normal.
We liked each other's company, and there isn't very much money. So when Evelyn was born, we let ourselves get tied down. Now that Gerald's here, well, even more so.
And you say he was at the hospital on Guy Fawkes Day?
Yes, he brought flowers. Oh, I told him he shouldn't spend money on frippery like that, but it was sweet, and yes, he did say something about tomorrow will have to take care of itself.
Of course, not one word to any of the 4 women about the others. This was a matter for the inspector and the sergeant to keep strictly to themselves for a while at least. But beyond this, nothing. No sign of Robert Williams. Routine, if thorough, checks were made of the 4 areas where the 4 women lived.
Inspector Lodge here.
Call for you, sir. A Mr. Thomas Brickwell from Farringham.
Oh, I don't know any Brickwell.
He says he wants the inspector in charge of the Williams case.
Oh, does he? All right, put him through, Sergeant. I'll speak to Mr. Brickwell.
Yes, sir.
Inspector Lodge speaking.
My name is Brickwell. I own a dry goods shop in Farringham, 215 Harley Road.
Go on, Mr. Brickwell.
I'm fed up with this Williams fellow. Think it's high time you police did something about it.
Well, we hope to, sir. Quite soon.
Then why don't you pick him up? Today.
Have you any idea where he may be?
He's on the 10:30 bus for Bournemouth.
What?
Left my house just a while ago. Oh. As far as my daughter Mary is concerned, I'd be just as pleased if she never saw him again.
Oh, is he your son-in-law, Mr. Brickwell?
Not yet. And never, if Mary will listen to me. I don't like the whole thing, Inspector. Turns up without his car, then the car is reported burned up, and Williams won't go to the police. Mumbles something about not wanting to be involved. It's a funny business, and I'm interested in protecting my daughter.
Well, you've been most helpful, Mr. Brickwell. We'll be in touch with you shortly. Good day, sir.
Good day, Inspector.
Yes, sir?
Sergeant, our man is on the bus that left Farringham for Bournemouth at 10:30. Check its first stop and pick him up. It looks as if he left his latest conquest to visit his latest offspring.
I beg your pardon, sir. Is your name Williams? Robert Williams?
Oh, yes, it is. What can I do for you?
I'm from the CID, sir. I hope you don't mind coming along. Inspector Lorch would appreciate a word with you.
May I see your identification?
Of course. Here you are.
I see. Oh, very well, Sergeant. You know, it's a little strange. Actually, I was on my way to see you.
Well, that was his story. And he stayed with it all the way. He was on his way to the yard to tell his story. And it was quite a story.
Let's have that again, Mr. Williams.
I picked up this hitchhiker, you see, just below Northampton. He had a bottle and began to drink rather steadily.
See?
I was just about on the verge of asking him to leave the car when the engine began to cough. I was getting out of petrol, so I pulled over to the side of the road and off. My passenger seemed to be asleep. I I took the petrol tin from the back, the one I keep for such emergencies, you see, and just as I started for the road, the man called out.
Oh, he wasn't asleep then?
Apparently not. Did I have a smoke on me, he wanted to know. I tossed him a cigar. Never smoke myself, but just keep them for the customers. You know how that is.
Yes, of course. Go on, Mr. Williams.
Well, I started for the road again, and suddenly I heard a kind of whoosh behind me. I looked, and my car was a sheet of flame. My passenger was in the middle of it. I must have panicked. The next thing I knew, I was running up the road.
And that's all you remember?
That's all.
Anything you want to ask him, Sergeant?
Yes, sir. Mr. Williams, you took your briefcase with you when you went for petrol?
I was afraid my passenger might steal it. He had his hand on it several times earlier.
You don't wear hats, Mr. Williams?
I must have lost it. When I realized I was running away, I realized, too, that I had no hat. I bought a new one.
How about trouser belts, sir?
No, only braces.
That's all. Thank you, Inspector.
Now, tell us, if you will, Mr. Williams, why you never came forward until we found you.
Oh, that. Well, I guess you'd better know. You'll find out anyway. Women. Too many of them.
You are married, aren't you?
To one of them. Nora. A loyal girl. No questions asked. Wonderful woman.
Yes, she is. We've talked to her. In fact, she's on her way here now.
You won't mention what I told you, gentlemen, about the others? Between us men, that is.
Yes, we'll respect your confidence, Mr. Williams, as far as the law allows. Mr. Williams, did you have a mallet in the toolbox of your car?
Yes. Yes, I did. I used it for pounding dents out of fenders.
Did you take it out when you stopped along the road on bonfire night?
Oh, come to think of it, I did. The cap of the petrol tin seemed stuck, and I think I used it to loosen the cap.
And then?
Well, I must have dropped it near the car.
Yes, you must have. Well, that'll do for now. If you'd care to wait for your wife, Nora, you can wait in the next room.
Oh, thank you, gentlemen. I'll do just that.
This way, Mr. Williams.
Oh, thank you, Sergeant. Thank you very much.
Well, sir?
4 women. Not too much money. You pick up a tramp no one will ever miss, get him drunk, burn your car and the tramp, let the world think you died in your own car, and start over. Seems so simple. It's really quite complicated. And where there are complications, there are always discrepancies. Aren't there, Sergeant?
Discrepancies. Yeah, several. Did you notice them? Now you take the business of the mallet, the 3 extra wives, the disposal of the petrol tin, holes, big ones. And of all people, it was Nora Williams who supplied the next one.
If I may, Inspector, I'd like to have my husband's wallet returned now.
Oh, is there something in it he particularly wants?
Yes, some of the money. He's out of tobacco and wants to buy some cigars.
Oh.
I never saw such a man for smoking. Pipes, cigars, cigarettes. He certainly loves tobacco.
Next one. And if Robert Williams lied on that score, in how many other instances?
We found the petrol tin 15 yards from the wreck. How did it get there, Mr. Williams?
I must have carried it there and dropped it or something.
Our pathologist states positively that the hairs caught on the mallet are human hairs. How do you account for that, Mr. Williams?
How should I know? Maybe somebody got hit with it somewhere, sometime. How should I know?
You said you don't smoke. Then your wife asks for your money to buy tobacco. Why did you lie, Williams?
What's she trying to do? Frame me?
I suggest, Williams, that you had petrol in that tin all the time. That you poured it over that vagrant after you knocked him unconscious with a mallet. That you laid a trail to the car and set fire to it yourself.
Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. What for? Why should I do a thing like that?
We have that answer, Williams. All 4 answers. In London, Brixton, Greenwich and Bournemouth. And a possible 5th in Faringham. Your story doesn't wash, Williams. We're charging you with willful murder. And I warn you that anything you say will be taken down in writing and may be used in evidence. Now, about this mallet.
And that mallet can be found today if you look for it. In an honored place. In the Black Museum.
Orson Welles will be back with you in just a moment.
No one actually saw the crime committed by Robert Williams, did they? But the circumstances were clear, and certainly Williams's life was the life of a rascal, to say the least. However, it may interest you to know that the day following Williams's execution, a London newspaper published a last-minute interview with the prisoner in which he confessed the crime, admitted the details as Inspector Lodge had deduced them, and revealed for the first time that the man he killed was entirely unknown to him, a vagrant whom he'd picked up in his car once or twice before. To the extent that Williams paid with his life, justice was served. Of the 4 women who'd been his dupes, nothing is known except that they picked up the pieces of their lives as well as they could. And the mallet, our exhibit, can be found in its customary place in Scotland Yard in the Black Museum.
And now, until next time, till we meet again in the same place, and I tell you another story of the Black Museum, I remain as always, obediently yours.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London. The Black Museum is a repository of death. Yes, here in the grim stone structure on the Thames, which houses Scotland Yard, is a warehouse of homicide, where everyday objects, a glass ashtray, a porcelain vase, an electric fan, all are touched by murder. Here's a piece of an iron chain. It's a familiar object. It might be a bar on a gravel driveway. It might rest in an emergency truck, a use in towing an automobile. It might. But in this case, it was the cause of death.
Remember this, Bardsby?
Hey, of course, Inspector. You knew, didn't you, we just about then closed the file on the Telp killing?
Yes, you told me. It's just as well there's no statute of limitations on murder.
And today, that chain can be seen in its place in the Black Museum.
From the annals of the Criminal Investigation Department of the London Police, we bring you the dramatic stories of the crimes recorded by the objects in Scotland Yard's Gallery of Death, the Black Museum. In just a moment, you will hear The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles. Now, The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles.
Well, here we are, the Black Museum, Scotland Yard's Museum of Murder. Here lies death. This is different, quite different from a graveyard. Tombstones mark only the mounds beneath which dust has returned to dust, but these white cards, with the neat black lettering, designate the means of death. And in every case, it's been violent. Here's the chain. Chain. Now, what do you associate with the word, with the sound, chain? Ships and anchors? Slavery? Bars and prisons, maybe? Oh, hardly with a young girl of 23, seated in a hard chair in the bare office of Inspector Hall at Scotland Yard.
I'm sorry to ask you to repeat that statement, Miss Tomlinson. You'll understand that I find it rather hard to believe. You feel the same way, don't you, Sergeant?
I do, sir. No doubt about it, I do.
Well, I rather expected you would, Inspector. In modern times, no one believes in ghosts.
Do you, Miss Tomlinson?
Well, I didn't. Now I do.
And you've no explanation for these, phenomena?
If I had, I wouldn't be here, Inspector. You must believe me. There is a ghost, and I'm frightened.
You mean, Miss Tomlinson, there are noises in the night, and they frighten you?
Noises. And the voice. My father's voice. He wants me out of the house. Well, why should he want me out when he left it to me? When we were so happy there together.
Just you and your father?
Mother died when I was very little. I hardly knew her. Now there's only myself.
And the house? Haunted. I see. Does this ghost, by any chance, rattle chains?
Yes. Oh, it's a horrible sound.
Apparently the good inspector had his own ideas about this ghost. In fact, after Joan Tomlinson left his office.
Interested, Preston?
In ghosts? Little, sir.
In good-looking heiresses, Sergeant.
Oh, that, sir. No, sir. But it might be possible that someone else is, or in her property.
Perhaps. Well, look into it, Preston. If we don't, the odds are the young lady will be back until we do. Let me have a report in the morning.
The morning was 8 hours away as Sergeant Preston walked up the quiet street in the London suburb where each house stood alone on its own plot of ground. Even in the inadequate light from the street lamps, the sergeant could see something of well-kept lawns and trim hedges. He turned in at a concrete driveway, skirted 2 garages and attendant back gardens, finding his way to a screened back porch where a light showed briefly.
You came, Sergeant.
Thank you for the light.
My torch. I didn't want you to try the wrong house. This way. I thought we'd wait in the upstairs sitting room.
Whatever you think best, miss. It's your ghost.
Yes, isn't it? The stairs are this way.
The sergeant felt, rather than saw, in the darkness, that it was a large house. Seemed to be several rooms on the ground floor, and upstairs they passed 3 closed doors before they entered the sitting room, which apparently extended the full width of the building.
That's the comfortable chair. It was Father's.
Thank you, miss.
A drink?
No, thank you. I'll smoke, if I may.
Yes, of course.
When does he come? Midnight?
Any time after I've gone to bed. Usually around now.
They waited. Nothing.
Think he'll come tonight, miss? What's that?
It's starting. You'll see. It's starting.
The inspector will never believe that
Do you hear it, Sergeant? Do you?
How can I help it, miss?
Tony, can you hear me?
It's just like... It sounds so like him.
Tony, I can't rest. I can't. Not with you. Alone. Alone. In the house. Oh.
It's human. It's got to be.
Does it, Sergeant, really? Does it have to be human? Have you ever been to a seance, Sergeant? Have you ever heard of the researches of Conan Doyle and dozens of others?
Now do you believe me, Sergeant?
There's something, miss.
Well, who could sound like my father? Who? Who would call me Joni? Oh, all right. We might as well have some lights now. It won't come back until tomorrow night.
I see. Only once a night.
Yes. Well, don't you want to search the house or anything?
Well, Sergeant, don't you? If this thing is human, there ought to be some trace, Sergeant. Oughtn't there?
No, miss. Whatever it is, will be gone now. Maybe tomorrow night.
Well, you'll report this to the inspector. Please.
Yes, of course. Shouldn't you go to a hotel for a while, miss, till this is cleared up?
Oh, I thought of that a week ago, Sergeant. But, well, I like my own room, and if it is my father, he won't harm me. He'd never do that.
You're very certain of that, aren't you, young lady? Aren't you a bit confused? If you believe that, why worry? Why go to the police, to the yard? Why be frightened of a fatherly ghost? And when the sergeant asks that...
I know, but I wanted someone else to hear him. I was scared. Well, maybe I was imagining things. I'll be all right, Sergeant. I expect I'm safe in my own house.
And so you send the sergeant on his way, the sergeant who ought to have searched the house. You take him down the back stairs and out the back door, Joan. You go upstairs, alone, to your own room and start to undress. Talk to yourself, give yourself courage.
Stop it, Joan Tomlinson. Stop it here. There's nothing to be afraid of. You're not going crazy. The lights. What? Why the lights are... Oh, no!
Joan.
Yes, Dad. Yes?
Go away, Joan. Go away before I have to hurt you. I don't want to. It's part of my punishment. I have to hurt you. Leave the house. Go away. Quickly. Run, Joan. Don't let me get you. Run. Run.
Yes, run. Run, Joan, run. There's menace in it now. Run, Joan, out into the black hallway down the front stairs. Run.
Help! Oh, somebody help me! Oh!
Miss Tomlinson. I waited about, miss. Thought he might come back. Heard you scream. Now, see here, miss. You're going straight to hospital, and I'm going straight to the inspector. I don't like the looks of this, not a bit.
Or who would like the looks of it? Particularly if you didn't believe in ghosts. And, of course, Inspector Hull didn't believe in ghosts. Standing beside Joan in her room at the hospital, he was quite explicit.
It's a mighty corporeal ghost, Miss...
How do you know, Inspector?
Your twisted ankle. That was no accident. A stair tread was sawn through. I understand ghosts have difficulty with cross-cut saws. Miss Tomlinson, do you have any next of kin? That is, anyone who might benefit if anything happened to you?
Only some second cousins. I haven't seen them in years.
They live in London?
Why, no. There was Larry Telk. He was in Manchester. I had a note after Father died. And Jerry Hennessy, he lives in Norwich. Yes, I think... And yes, of course, Ruth Carstairs. Father spoke of her. She's a school teacher, the oldest, a school in Bristol. But that's impossible, Inspector. None of them...
None of them would want you out of the way?
No, of course not.
I see. Then how do you account for this, Miss Tomlinson, Sergeant?
Yes, sir. Here it is.
But where did you...
In the cellar of your house, under some burlap bags, right near the furnace, Miss Tomlinson. the furnace with its tin ducts to the registers in the room above. Many a youngster has used these echoing ducts to imitate a ghost or to overhear what was going on in another room. As I said before, Miss Tomlinson, this is a mighty corporeal ghost. He saw through stairs. He uses hot air ducts to amplify his voice, and he carries his own sound effects. I don't like this any more than Sergeant Preston does, miss. I don't like it at all.
And today, that same chain can be seen in the Black Museum.
In just a moment, we will continue with The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles. And now we continue with The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles.
A piece of iron chain. The hot air ducts to carry a voice through a lonely house. No ghost, this, but someone with a plan and a motive. Inspector Hull had no illusions about ghosts, and certainly none about the danger to Joan Tomlinson.
All right, Preston. Let's get to work on this.
The three cousins?
Right.
The girl says there's no possibility.
Where there's a will, Sergeant, there's a way to start someone thinking. The girl was wrong about her ghost. She can be wrong about her cousins. Get the wires out, Preston. And I want an unobtrusive guard on the house, 24 hours a day. You've got the names of those people she mentioned?
Simple. Routine. Teletype messages. Advise earliest convenience. Well, the advice came so conveniently early that Inspector Hull, who sat at his desk with the 3 bits of yellow paper before him, remarked to Sergeant Preston,
"It's unbelievable, Sergeant."
Coincidence, sir?
Coincidence? My foot. All three dead within a few days of each other. All three filed, unsolved. Telk, July 6. Hennessy, July 8. Carstairs, July 12. Sergeant, under no circumstances is that girl to be permitted to leave the hospital. That's an order. She's safe there.
How long, Inspector?
Until I get back.
Back, sir?
Don't look blank, Preston. Just look at these telegraph replies. I'm making a cook's tour of these 3 cities, Manchester, Norwich, and Bristol. Obviously, I need facts. There seem to be quite a few facts in Manchester, Norwich, and Bristol.
England isn't so very large, you see, and the trains are fast. In Manchester.
I understand, Bardsby, that the Telk case was in your hands.
Aye, that's correct, sir.
Well, how far did you get?
No motive, nothing. Just this man Telk walking home alone on a July night, toward 11, a dark street, a carving knife in his back. That's all.
A night train to Norwich. Another police headquarters, another detective. Anxious to cooperate.
Here it is, Inspector. All we have on the Hennessy case.
Tell me about it, Wilson.
Hit and run driver. I checked the scene myself. Hennessy was hit on the sidewalk. Looked as if some drunk had driven right up on the walk and crushed the man against the building wall.
And so a pattern emerges. 2 men die, quite unexpectedly, but in this case, no clues, no indication that there was purpose or motive, except that a 3rd man died quite naturally in London. And his daughter was the victim of deliberate fright. And all those involved were related to each other. As a pattern emerges. It's continued in Bristol.
All right, Appleby. What have you on the Carstairs woman? A school teacher. I believe she was...
Yes, retired, quiet, the usual, until she took some headache remedy the night of July the 12th. Unfortunately for her, someone had put strychnine in the bottle.
I know that kind of death. Nasty. Anything else?
Some prints on the bottle, not hers. She smudged them with her own when she took the bottle out of the medicine cabinet. Her landlady said she had a visitor the day before, but she usually did. Former students, all that sort of thing.
Mind if I go over and see that landlady?
Oh, not at all. The name is Ross. Help yourself. Quite a talker, that woman. Got away.
It was a semi-detached villa with a vacancy sign on the door. Mrs. Ross was indeed quite a talker. Inspector Hull let her talk.
At least 15 years. Oh, a wonderful woman, Inspector, sir. So many of our students come to see her, even after she retired. The kind of teacher you don't find nowadays.
I know exactly what you mean, ma'am.
And she was so happy that day, what with her cousin being here the day before and all.
Her cousin, Mrs. Ross?
Yes, I remember it clearly. She called. She was going out for a bit of cake for tea, now that her cousin Michael Stroud had come to see her.
A new name. Another cousin. One Michael Stroud. Carefully now, Inspector. Carefully.
You don't happen to know where he was from now, do you, ma'am?
Oh, from London. I have the address. Found an envelope in the waste paper basket while I was clearing out the poor thing's room.
Did you tell this to the police?
No, sir. They were so busy with their bustle and dusting everything for fingerprints, they said.
Yes, of course. Now, Mrs. Ross, may I have that address, please? That is, if you still have it.
A teletype message travels much faster than a train from Bristol to London. By the time the inspector reached his office, Sergeant Preston was waiting with the answer.
We've been there, sir. Michael Stroud had a flat at the address, but he's moved and left no forwarding address.
Oh, when did he move out?
July 13, sir. The day after the Carstairs woman died.
When the quarry is escaping, what do? Well, the least you can do is close some of the gaps in the situation. Try to develop motive and opportunity. The inspector permitted Joan Tomlinson to leave the hospital and to proceed in his company to the office of a solicitor.
Now, sit down, Joan. And you, Inspector.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you.
I gather something is amiss.
Mr. Thomas, we have reason to believe that 3 people have died because of Miss Tomlinson's inheritance, and that her own life is in danger.
Well, that's unbelievable, sir.
It usually is. However, the 3 who are dead are all second cousins of Miss Tomlinson, her next of kin. What we are here to find out is, does the will under which she inherits her property state to whom that property devises in the event of her death?
Not exactly. That is, if she dies intestate, the property under the law would pass to her next of kin, in equal shares, of course.
Mr. Thomas,
yes?
With all her second cousins dead, a third cousin would be next in line, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Of course, I know of no such relative, sir.
Unfortunately, sir, we do. His name is Michael Stroud. His whereabouts at present are unknown.
Motive, present. Very definitely present. Opportunity, obvious. And seized at least 3 times. In Manchester, Norwich, and Bristol. After the next move, the inspector outlined a plan, briefly.
Miss Tomlinson, do you still believe in ghosts?
Not anymore.
Very well. Would you be afraid to stay in your house? Alone?
I see. I'm to be the bit of cheese in the trap. Correct, Inspector?
Absolutely correct.
Very well. When do we begin?
Only began that night. Joan left the hospital, returned to her house, to the memories, to the now silent ducts, to the still chiming clock. The first night was uneventful. Others followed. Bit by bit, Joan slipped back into her normal everyday routine, a girl in her home with a servant during the day, alone at night. The ghost, the 3 deaths in 3 cities, the inspector began to take on aspects of a dream. Reality was coming home after an evening in the city, going upstairs, listening to the little clock, preparing for sleep, indulging in the little habit of talking to herself.
There's nothing to worry about. Really nothing. He's gone away. Out of the country, maybe. Forget Michael Stroud, Joni. Forget the whole thing. What's that?
How are you, Joan? Feeling well? And safe?
Get out. Whoever you are.
That won't work, Johnny. You know I'm your cousin Michael. Come to call.
But I never saw you before.
In my life? I know, dear. And now that you have seen me, what else is there to live for?
No, but you couldn't get away with it.
Oh, yes, I could. I can. I will. You'll be a lovely suicide, dear. Carbon monoxide from the register from the furnace. Or maybe, yes, maybe they'll call it accidental death.
Inspector Harlan find you.
Oh?
No matter where you are.
I doubt it. He wasn't around to seize me tonight, was he? And I'm very good at hiding. More than ever tie me to Cousin Larry or Cousin Jerry or Cousin Ruth.
They will. They have. There are fingerprints.
Ah, there now. That's their worry, not mine. Now sit down. In that chair.
I won't.
Sit down. I have it planned perfectly, Joan. You'll sit down, I'll tie you in that chair, shut the windows, the door, turn on the heat. You'll be gagged, too. I forgot to mention that. You'll die.
No.
I'll come back, put you on the bed.
No! No, you won't! You can't make me!
I said sit down and shut up!
Take him in charge, Sergeant. We have enough.
A trap! With Joe in the bait!
Sergeant, look out!
Yes, sir!
Oh, thank you, sir, for getting his gun away, sir. Nicely handled, Sergeant. You all right, Miss Tomlinson?
Yes, I think so. He is a very corporeal ghost. Isn't he, Inspector?
Definitely. And I believe his corporeal fingerprints will match those on the handle of a very corporeal knife in Manchester, a steering wheel in Norwich, a bottle in Bristol, and a certain chain in the possession of Scotland Yard.
Have you ever heard of a ghost's fingerprint? No. Neither have I. But that chain isn't ghostly. You can see it today in the Black Museum.
Orson Welles will be back with you in just a moment. Now here in person is Orson Welles.
The fingerprints matched, of course. Mrs. Ross, the landlady in Bristol, identified Michael Stroud as the caller who spent some moments alone in Miss Carstairs' apartment the day before that worthy lady died. The case was clear. The defense was helpless. The case was closed at the traditional time one morning in the usual manner, and Michael Stroud, at the hands of the Crown, became forever an incorporeal ghost. And the chain remains in its usual place in Scotland Yard. And now, until we meet next time, I tell you another story of the Black Museum. I remain, as always, obediently yours.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London. The Black Museum, a repository of death, a repertorium of violence. Here in the grim stone structure on the Thames, which houses Scotland Yard, is a warehouse of homicide, where everyday objects, a teacup and its saucer, a lady's parasol, a surveyor's chain, all are touched by murder. Now, you take this lady's shoe. It's a familiar object, high of heel, neat cross straps, dainty design on the toe, an excellent sample of the art of the modern bootmaker.
Like my new shoes, Henry.
Lovely, my dear. Shows off your instep perfectly. And the way it breaks away from the curve of your arch. Enticing. Definitely enticing, my dear.
Henry, you're impossible. And I love it.
A nice couple talking about a pair of shoes. You'll hear more about that couple and more about the shoes. One of those shoes, by the way, is to be found today in the Black Museum.
From the annals of the Criminal Investigation Department of the London Police, we bring you the dramatic stories of the crimes recorded by the objects in Scotland Yard's Gallery of Death, the Black Museum. In just a moment, you will hear The Black Museum, starring Orson Welles. Museum, Scotland Yard's mausoleum of murder. Here lies death, entombed neatly with printed labels, with records of names, places, times, each white card a kind of tombstone. Very interesting collection in this museum. Here, there's a gardener's clippers. If you have a hedge around your property, you own one, long, sharp, triangular blades. They're fine for clipping boxwood. Fine, too, it was learned, for clipping jugular veins. And here's a true weapon, a revolver, lady's gun. This little .22. But the lady who used this one summer evening made very sure of her victim. She coated the tiny bullets with cyanide. Yes, and the shoe. Oh, there are a pair of them, of course. Charming, delightful. That's the type of fragile footwear a lady of some means would be expected to own. Elizabeth Marlowe was just such a lady. And she bought the shoes to please Henry Higley, who'd persuaded her that her age of nearly 40 was not too old for marriage. And she wore them as she drove through the stormy night, which marked the beginning of her honeymoon.
The storm seems to be getting worse, Henry, darling.
Don't worry, my dear. Here's the inn. The light's just ahead.
Too bad the house wasn't ready for us tonight.
Our first night in our own house?
I'd have loved it, dear. It's so charming, so Elizabethan, from half timbers to the moat. Imagine a house with a moat.
I wanted something Elizabethan, darling. After all, it'll be a setting for my Elizabeth.
Gay, happy conversation, honeymoon talk. In spite of the rain pouring over the windshield. In spite of the dramatic lightning and the rolling thunder. Henry helped Elizabeth out of the worst of the rain, handed her a funny little terrier named Patsy, which Elizabeth had insisted on bringing with her, and then knocked on the door of Webley's Inn.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Come in, please.
I'm Henry Higley. This is my wife. You're...
Martha Webley. I've given you up, what with the weather and all. We wouldn't have missed this for the world, Mrs. Webley. The storm. Well, it's almost romantic. Oh, the little dog. Oh, isn't he sweet?
Are our rooms ready, Mrs. Webley?
Oh, of course. And a fire going against the storm. Oh, and may I take the opportunity, ma'am, sir, of wishing you all the happiness?
The Higleys stayed at the Webley Inn for several weeks until the house was ready. The Elizabethan house with the half timbers and the moat standing on the edge of the moor. As Martha Webley put it,
they were so happy. Middle-aged, but happy as kids.
If laughter and enjoyment of simple things is happiness, then Henry and Elizabeth knew happiness. They drove over to their house each day and each evening. They discussed its progress.
Would you like the moat drained, dear?
But the water is part of it. Without the water, it would be just a ditch.
I thought perhaps you'd like to make a rose garden out of it.
But there was a garden at the rear of the house, so the water stayed in the moat. The mock drawbridge was always down, and very soon Henry carried Elizabeth across the bridge and into their home.
Home at last.
It's going to be wonderful, dear.
Glad you bought the place?
We bought it, darling.
With your money, sweet.
What's mine is yours. Ours, darling, always. Now, come along upstairs.
There's always a lot to do in a 10-room house. Nobody with any sense tries to run a place of that size without help. So Henry, with Elizabeth's approval, interviewed several local young ladies.
What's your name, young woman?
June Godwin, sir. And here's my reference.
Yes, I see. Upstairs maid, also parlour maid. Any cooking?
Just plain cooking, sir.
My wife and I are plain people. We thought we'd try to get along without a regular cook, for a while at least.
I'll do my best, sir.
I'm sure you will.
Then I'm hard, Mr. Wrigley?
Why not? You've a good reference. That'll please your mistress, and you've your share of good looks. That pleases me.
So that was the way the wind blew, was it? And so soon after the wedding. Well, well, well. Little June Godwin went about her business, dismissing the remark as the pleasantry of a new employer who wanted her to feel at home. Now Henry established the custom in that household of giving his wife her breakfast in bed. June prepared the tray and took it upstairs. She'd been doing this for about a week.
My, don't we look fresh and neat and beautiful this morning?
Mr. Higley, please, sir, don't.
Shy, are you, eh? With those eyes and that figure? Come here, little one.
No, sir, please.
What do the boys hereabouts think of you?
I wouldn't know, sir. If you'll excuse me, sir, I'll take the tray to Mrs. Higley.
Handled herself well, didn't she, for a country girl? There's no nonsense about June Godwin. She needed the job. She was a loyal girl, loyal to her mistress and to herself in a way. Maybe that's why she spoke as she did. She deposited the breakfast tray in Elizabeth Higley's bedroom.
Ma'am, if I can speak to you a minute.
Of course, June. What's the trouble?
It's about Mr. Higley, ma'am.
Oh?
Well, ma'am, it's not that I'm giving my notice or anything, but I'm a nice girl, ma'am.
Of course you are.
Mr. Higley, ma'am, he tried to take privileges this morning.
Perhaps you'd better try to
June finally managed to tell her mistress the brief details. Elizabeth was hardly pleased, but she showed nothing of her feelings to Henry, at least on that score. Of course, there may have been something more than a slight edge to her tone later that day, as she said to him,
"There's a notice from the bank, Henry. It says my account is overdrawn."
Oh? How much?
Almost £300. This never happened to me before I added your signature to the account.
Oh, but there was plenty there.
I know. But there's a cheque here which I thought was for £30, and it turns out to be for 300.
But I thought I told you, darling. It was 300. In any case, dear, your dividends are due in a few days, so let's not worry about it.
a simple explanation, and very smooth. Just the type of explanation an infatuated woman can be expected to accept. But for Elizabeth, the infatuation and the honeymoon were over. They came to an abrupt end about a week later.
June, little June, I want to see you a moment.
Can it wait till morning, Mr. Wrigley? Please.
Impossible. I must see you now.
I can't let you in. I'm in bed. I'm not dressed.
That doesn't matter. Let me in, June. I have to talk to you now. I'll use my master key.
Oh.
Open up and let me in. Shut up, you little fool. Open the door. All right, but we'll settle this, and soon. Soon.
What's wrong, June? Are you ill?
Oh, Mrs. Higley, Mrs. Higley. Oh, Mrs. Higley, I'm so frightened.
I understand, June. It was my husband. Again. Wasn't it?
The end of the honeymoon. But it came quickly after that. Elizabeth said simply,
Henry, I'm leaving you. I'm going into London to talk with my lawyer.
After your talk with him, you'll change your mind. Taking a servant's word against mine. Really, my dear. What train are you making? I'll drive you into town.
A little while later, Henry dropped into the kitchen and told June quite coolly,
I'm driving Mrs. Higley into the station. She's going up to London. I'll pick her up on the 9:45 tonight when she comes back.
At 9:15 that night, Henry told the servant girl,
I'm going in to pick up Mrs. Higley. We should be back a little after 10.
And at 10:15, Henry came back.
Funny. Mrs. Higley wasn't at the station. She must have missed the train and decided to stay in town for the night.
And then the next day,
I've had a letter from Mrs. Higley. She's staying with relatives in London for a few days. Nothing to worry about.
But June did worry. And she took her worries to her mother.
I'm sure he's lying, Mums. I'm sure of it.
Now, Junie, don't be excitable.
I'm not, Mums. I'm not. He told me he was going to the station to call for her, but I didn't hear the car.
Perhaps you weren't paying attention.
He said he had a letter, and the postman never called that morning. And last night he tried to get into my room again. I won't go back, Mums. Now I'm home again, I won't go back.
This was gossip. Oh, yes, gossip indeed. But Mrs. Goodwin restrained herself for a while. After all, there was only one other person in the village who knew the Higleys. That was Mrs. Webley at the inn. Yes, Mrs. Webley.
Now, what's all that? Why, it's the Higley dog. Patsy. Oh, here, Patsy. What's the trouble, doggy? Miss your mistress, is that it? Do you miss your mistress?
The shoe, by the way, reposes today in an honored position in the Black Museum.
trembles at the back door and whines with fear. Then it wags its tail and snuffles in appreciation of a pat on the head. But mention its mistress, and the howling begins again. Is this a clue to a possible crime? Certainly it'd have no meaning in a court of law. A clever defense counsel would have it stricken from the records within minutes. But it would have meaning among plain people who are sensitive to many of the laws of nature.
Another cup of tea, Mrs. Godwin.
No, thank you, Mrs. Webley.
June, dearie?
I couldn't touch a thing. I'm so upset about the poor little doggy.
Oh, she's all right. I'm sure
But you said you called the moat house and he came for the dog right away.
Oh, I doubt he'll hurt the little animal.
Has other things on his mind he has with that one working for him.
That Muriel, you mean?
Exactly. And glad I am that my June up and left him when she did. Have you seen or heard of Mrs. Higley, dear?
Not a word. No sign. But then, maybe she knows about that Muriel.
3 people knew about that Muriel by now, the new hired girl at Henry Higley's house. And before very long, others would know, but this held no foreboding for Henry Higley. Now for that Muriel.
Now, Mr. Higley, you mustn't.
Why not, my dear? Who's to know except you and me?
Oh, Mr. Higley, how you do go on. Oh, Mr. Higley.
Give us a kiss, pretty one. But never say I told you it went with the job.
Oh, well, just one.
Muriel, when are you going to stop calling me Mr. Higley, eh?
A kind of mean paradise surrounded by a moat filled with water, reached by a mock drawbridge which was never raised. And into that pseudo-idyllic setting, across that bridge, there strode a caller. He rang the doorbell.
Yes, sir.
Is Mr. Higley at home?
Who might be calling, sir?
Inspector Sterrett, Scotland Yard.
3 people knew, and soon many more. Word spread. The police evinced some interest. The inspector called and was invited in. He was offered a drink, tea. He refused politely.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Higley. No, I've only a short while. May I ask the whereabouts of Mrs. Higley?
Of course you may ask. As far as I know, she's staying with friends in London. I have some letters if you care to see them.
Oh, we'll take your word for it, Mr. Higley. But there's been some talk, ugly rumours, you understand, I'm sure.
Yes, I had to discharge a servant girl.
We were given to understand she left of her own accord.
Not at all. The girl seemed a trifle hard of hearing. Couldn't hear my car on the driveway. Missed the postman's whistle constantly.
I see. And then there's the little dog. Seems to have been howling a bit.
Oh, if you look out of the window there in the back garden, eh? Seems quite contented, doesn't she?
Yes, she does. Well, thank you very much for the courtesy.
The inspector took his leave. When the door closed behind him, Henry Higley did some thinking. The next day, he spoke to Muriel.
How would you like to take a trip with me, Muriel?
Oh, you mean close at the house?
Why not?
I'm not sure I want to go away. Oh, you're a sweet man, Henry, but I live here.
You've no idea how we could live, what fun we could have. I can draw all the cash from the banks in 10 and 25-pound notes, so it wouldn't take too much room. And we could have a time in London, a real time. I'd buy some
So
clothes.
Henry planned a little trip. And he took the trip. Oddly enough, Muriel didn't go along. A permanent tie was not in her plans at the moment. She stayed behind in the house with a little dog for company. All was quiet after Henry went away. Quiet, yes. Inactive? Oh, no.
Tell me, Mr. Marlowe, when did you last hear from your sister?
Elizabeth wrote us just after she moved into the house with her husband. I'm afraid we never answered her. The family disapproved of Higley, you see.
Oh, any particular reason?
Well, he was penniless. Elizabeth, as you probably know, has a nice income from quite a bit of capital. She bought the house, you see.
Yes, we heard about that. That's one reason we sought you out, Mr. Marlowe.
Are you intimating the possibility of trouble, Inspector?
There's always the possibility when a grown person disappears without a trace. And there have been rumors and a few odd coincidences. In any case, we checked the bank. The manager showed us these papers.
Oh, what are they?
A deed transfer giving full title to the house and property to Henry Higley. Is this your sister's signature, Mr. Marlowe?
Oh, let me see.
I need my glasses, I'm afraid, yes. Now then... Oh, strange. Looks like hers. But as if she'd suddenly grown old. It wavers so. There, for instance. The L and the W and the Marlowe. Elizabeth Marlowe Higley. Inspector, I want to compare it with her letters. But I think I can say with reasonable certainty that this is not my sister's signature.
Thank you, Mr. Marlowe. Thank you. To all stations, alert for one Henry Higley, wanted for forgery. Notify all banks. The following serial numbers are of £25 notes connected with forgery case. Appearance of any of these notes to be called to the attention of the local police at once in the usual manner.
At long last, the hunt was on. The charge pending. Forgery. The days passed. Nothing was reported, though an occasional banknote with a proper serial number did turn up in the ordinary course of business. Patiently, the places where the notes appeared were charted.
First Ramsgate, then Dover. A week later, Folkestone. I imagine we'll find he spent a few days in Paris. After that, Kingston. I expect we'll be hearing from London itself shortly.
From London itself.
How long does it take to change a mere £25? One would think the Bank of England had that much cash in small denominations lying about.
Beg pardon, sir. Are you the gentleman wanted to change this note?
I am.
Would you mind stepping this way for a moment, sir?
I'm rather in a hurry. Is something the matter with it?
With the note, no. My credentials, sir.
I see. Detective Inspector Andrews.
And you, sir?
Higley. Henry Higley. Why all the mystery, Inspector?
I'm afraid I shall have to ask you to come with us, sir. You see, the serial number of this banknote and several others have been published in a small matter of forgery.
Forgery? What's that to do with me?
I'm sure you had nothing to do with it, Mr. Higley, and that you will be most anxious to cooperate with the police. This way, sir, if you don't mind.
Henry did mind. His sense of cooperation became stunted quite suddenly. He found very little to tell Inspector Sterrett and Andrews.
Of course I drew the money. It was a joint account. I had a right to.
And what is your explanation of the transfer of the house?
There's none I can give you now. When Elizabeth returns...
Where is your wife, Higley?
She didn't say. Just staying with friends.
Any reason for that?
We had a quarrel, a lover's quarrel. She'll get over it when she comes back.
You seem very certain she will come back.
Have you any reason, Inspector, to doubt that she will?
No, not at the moment, nor any reason to doubt that you will be here awaiting her.
Do you mean to say you're thinking of holding me on charges?
Frankly, we are. You see, Higley, we did a little routine checking. We found that you'd been arrested 3 times, convicted once. In each case, the charge was swindling women who were old enough to know better. So we are holding you, Higley, and the charge is forgery.
Now, the direction of the search changed somewhat. Henry Higley was safe, and he'd remain so until Elizabeth Marlowe Higley was found.
We've no right to take the house apart like this. Mr. Higley will...
I'm sorry, my girl. We have a warrant.
I don't understand, sir. What are you looking for?
Not what, my girl. Whom? We're looking for Mrs. Higley.
In the cupboards and under the floor and... No. Oh, it isn't true. It isn't. She went away.
They took the house apart and put it back together again. Nothing. They dragged the moat around the house. Nothing. Then they drained it.
There it is, Sterrett. Dry as it ever will be, and nothing. Not a sign.
Mud looks mighty deep.
It's a quagmire down there. Watch this. Takes that stone as if it were nothing. He couldn't have thrown a body that far out, and there's no sign of anything on the sides.
He might have waded out, Andrews. The water wasn't particularly deep.
He'd have gone in up to his waist if he'd tried that. You know, it takes good soil to make mud like that.
Yes, I noticed. Funny the way they let the garden go to seed.
Oh, it's not too bad. Except for that patch of stunted bush over there, where the dog's lying.
Yes, let's have a look at that, shall we?
You never quit, do you, Sterrett?
Human beings can't disappear without a trace. They just don't, that's all. Oh, that's a good dog. There we are. There. These aren't stunted, Andrews. These are new plantings.
You're right. Look here, the whole area, straight to the moat. This earth was turned, and fairly recently, at least 10 yards of it.
That's a ditch, Andrews, a ditch that has been filled in. I think maybe we ought to start digging hereabouts. 8 hours now, and still nothing.
There'll be nothing. Another good idea gone wrong. Shall I tell the men to stop?
Yes, you may as well.
Sterrett, that dog. She's found something.
Yes, something she's recognized. Get those lights over here, men.
All right, sir, come up here. All right, come on here.
All right, you can start digging again, but carefully now. All around that spot. It's pretty obvious, Andrews. There's a body attached to that lady's shoe.
And as I told you at the beginning of this story, that shoe reposes today in an honored position in the Black Museum. The medical examiner swore that a .32 caliber bullet had killed Elizabeth Marlowe. The ballistics expert testified the bullet had come from the gun in Henry Higley's possession the day of his arrest in the Bank of England. Another expert adjusted the noose, placed the white hood over Higley's head, heard the man whisper the admission of his guilt, and sprang the trap. Martha Webley has Patsy now. The little dog enjoys the fields around Webley's Inn. A fit reward, I think you'll agree, for the faithfulness which brought her mistress's killer to final justice. And as I told you, the dainty shoe remains in its customary position in that big stone building on the Thames in Scotland Yard in the Black Museum. Now, until next time, until another story about the Black Museum, I remain as always obediently yours.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London. From the Black Museum, a repository of death. Yes, here in a grim stone structure on the Thames, which houses Scotland Yard, is a warehouse of homicide. Here, everyday objects, a silk scarf, a length of twine, a child's toy, all are touched by murder. Now, this jar, nothing more than a cheap stained glass container, the type you find in the laboratory, what's in it? A colorless fluid. Water, perhaps? A cleaning spirit? No.
Acid. Was just the thing to decompose a body without leaving any traces.
Exactly, Sergeant. You'd better take a sample of it.
Very well, Inspector. There's a jar on the shelf here. I'll use that.
Today, that jar containing the acid sample can be seen in the Black Museum.
From the annals of the Criminal Investigation Department of the London Police, we bring you the dramatic stories of the crimes recorded by the objects in Scotland Yard's Gallery of Death, the Black Museum.
Hart's Museum of Murder. Here lies death, unseen but ever present, uncatalogued but orderly, enveloping the shadows, papering the walls, carpeting the floor. Death, for display purposes only. Here's a hypodermic syringe. It was once used to inject life-preserving serums and later used to inject poison. And death. Here's an umbrella. Ordinary, everyday umbrella. Ordinary and everyday up to a point, that is. Look closer and you'll see just how sharp that point is. Just how lethal a sword stick can be as a weapon of murder. Now, here we are. Here's the acid jar, sealed and somber looking in its place on the shelf. Once this jar rested on another shelf, a workshop shelf in Crawley. But let's not anticipate. Let's begin our story at its beginning. Not on the shelf of a workshop in Crawley, but in the dining room of a hotel in Kensington. Dinner time. One corner of the room, at a table set for two, sits an attractive, fashionably dressed woman. She's joined by another equally as attractive and equally fashionably dressed.
Agnes. Oh, Lenny. I'd almost given you up for lost. Sorry if I kept you waiting, my dear. But just as I was leaving my room, I ran into Mr. Hart. He's such a lovely man. I simply couldn't resist stopping to have a few words with him. Mr. Hart? The nice-looking one I pointed out to you at lunchtime. Oh, yes, of course. He really is the sweetest thing. And so friendly. I thought he looked rather intriguing. You must introduce us. I will, my dear. And sooner than you think. I've asked him to join us when he comes down. You don't mind, I hope. Oh, the contrary. I'm so glad. I know you'll like him. Isn't that him coming in now? So it is. Over here, Mr. Hart.
Ah. Oh, forgive me for keeping you so long, Mrs. Regan. I had a little bother with my necktie.
Oh, please don't apologize. I only just arrived this minute myself. Oh, I'd like you to meet a very dear friend of mine, Mrs. Lansbury. Agnes, Mr. Hart. How do you do, Mr. Hart?
Delighted, Mrs. Lansbury. I do hope I'm not intruding.
Oh, a perfectly horrible thought. Of course you're not, Mr. Hart. Do sit down.
You're very kind.
What a thorough gentleman he was. And so amusing. So very, very amusing.
Oh, Mr. Hart, I do declare, it's a long time since I've laughed so much or enjoyed a meal so much.
Oh, save the latter compliments to the hotel cook, Mrs. Regan. And now I really must ask that you excuse me.
So soon? You won't take coffee with us?
Oh, much as I'd like to, Mrs. Regan, I'm afraid not. I have some rather pressing business to attend to this evening. Business that won't wait, even for coffee. Some other time, perhaps?
Oh, we'll hold you to that, you know.
Oh, please do, Mrs. Lansbury. Please do.
The two ladies, who were both widows, chatted on till late that evening, discussing the numerous virtues and charms of their newfound acquaintance, a topic that was continued the following morning at breakfast and then again at lunch.
Will he be dining with us this evening? I'll ask him when he comes in. Don't forget. As if I could, my dear.
The amiable Mr. Hart proved only too ready to accept a second dinner invitation and a third. He appeared to enjoy the two ladies' company as much as they did his. But it was upon Mrs. Regan that he centered most of his attention.
I thought of taking a stroll in the country this afternoon, Mrs. Regan. You wouldn't care to join me, I suppose?
Why, I'd love to, Mr. Hart. I simply adore the country.
Fine. We'll start out straight after lunch.
The country stroll agreed with Mrs. Regan, as proved by the healthy flush in her cheeks that evening as she sat down to dinner with Mrs. Lansbury.
You're looking very radiant tonight, my dear. Oh, am I? Your afternoon jaunt with Mr. Hart appears to have brought about a most desirable effect. It was rather refreshing. He's not coming down this evening? He has another business engagement. Oh. What exactly is his business, my dear? Well, I'm not sure. He never really discussed it with me. Pity. Oh, by the way, I'm off to town to do some shopping tomorrow afternoon. I thought we might go together. Oh, I'm sorry, dear, but I'm afraid I've made other arrangements. Oh? Yes. I promised to meet Mr. Hart. We're going to Crawley for the afternoon.
Oh, how nice for you.
You don't mind?
Oh, no, of course not. We can leave our trip to town to next week sometime. It makes no difference to me.
No, it made no difference to Agnes Lansbury. But to Renee Ashcroft Regan, it made a great deal of difference. The difference between life and death. Mrs. Regan did not appear for dinner the next evening, nor did Mr. Hart. Nothing particularly unusual about that. Obviously, they decided to stay in Crawley for dinner. Mrs. Lansbury dined alone at the hotel. The following morning, arriving down late for breakfast, she was surprised to find that there was still no sign of her friend.
Funny. Not often she misses breakfast.
Oh, good morning, Mrs. Lansbury.
Oh, Mr. Hart, good morning.
Mrs. Regan not down yet?
No, not yet.
Not like her to be late.
Well, she probably slept in.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Have you had breakfast?
Yes, I came in earlier, just on my way out.
Business again?
That's right. Well, I must be off. No doubt I'll see you at dinner.
Yes, don't be late.
I won't. Till this evening, then.
It was almost 9 o'clock when Mrs. Lansbury finally left the breakfast table, and still no sign of Mrs. Regan. Strange Mr. Hart had not mentioned their visit to Crawley the previous afternoon. But perhaps the dear man preferred to keep it a secret. One never knew what sort of gossip could spread itself about a hotel, given a spark of encouragement. Still it did seem rather odd. It seemed even more odd when Mrs. Regan did not appear for lunch. A feeling of uneasiness crept over Mrs. Lansbury. Perhaps her friend was ill. She would make some inquiries.
Oh, boy.
Yes, madam?
Have you seen Mrs. Regan about at all this morning?
Mrs. Regan? No, madam. Not that I can remember.
Well, perhaps you'd better take me to her room.
Very good, madam. This way.
The bellhop looked pretty in his blue uniform with a red braid and brass buttons. Such a fresh young face. So unspoiled looking and clean. With a quick, toothy smile. Not as engaging a smile as Mr. Hart's, perhaps, but nevertheless quite attractive in its way.
Here we are, madam.
Oh, thank you. Here.
Thank you, madam. Anything else you might be wanting?
Well, I'm not sure yet. Just a moment.
Must have stepped out for a bit.
Well, I'll try the door. Locked. Renee? Renee? Are you in there?
Nothing wrong, is there, madam?
I don't know. I think Mrs. Regan may be ill. You better go and call the manager. Tell him to bring a pass key.
Very good, madam. Won't be a jip.
The hotel manager arrived in due course, asked a few rather pointless questions, fiddled with his large key ring, and finally opened the door to Mrs. Regan's room. It was empty.
It looks as though your flowers were groundless, Mrs. Lansbury. She must have gone into town for the day.
But that still doesn't explain why she didn't come down to breakfast this morning.
Oh, perhaps she didn't feel like it. Still, I'll have a word with the room-maid. She may have noticed something when she came in to tidy up.
The room-maid was duly summoned and questioned. No, Mrs. Regan had not been in her room when she came in to clean up. Yes, she'd noticed something unusual, something most unusual, as a matter of fact. Mrs. Regan's bed had not been slept in on the previous night.
That settles it. Something's happened to her. I can feel it. She's met with some kind of accident and...
Pray calm yourself, Mrs. Lansbury. I'm sure there's...
Well, how can I calm myself when my closest friend has disappeared into thin air?
But, my
Well, the
darling...
police must be informed at once.
Oh, come now, Mrs. Lansbury. Let's not be too hasty.
Please don't argue with me, Mr. Stewart. I want them contacted immediately.
Very well, if you insist. But I would ask you to refrain from mentioning the matter to any of the other guests, at least until we have something definite.
At the hotel manager's request, Mrs. Lansbury agreed to keep silent. But being a woman, she could not keep entirely silent. She had to confide in someone. Naturally enough, the someone she confided in was the benign Mr. James Gerald Hart. His concern was touching.
Dear me, this is most upsetting, Mrs. Lansbury. When was the last time you saw Mrs. Regan?
Just after lunch yesterday. She was on her way out.
Did she by any chance say where she was going?
Well, Mr. Hart, as a matter of fact, yes, she did.
Oh?
Yes, she said she was going to meet you in town, that you were going down to Crawley together. Did she meet you, Mr. Hart?
Well, no, she didn't. That's just what I was about to tell you. I'd arranged to meet her outside the Army and Navy Stores in Victoria Street at 2 o'clock. I was there on time, and I waited over an hour, but she didn't show up.
Oh.
Have the police been contacted?
Well, yes, the hotel manager, Mr. Stewart, gave them a ring shortly after lunch.
They hadn't been here?
Well, not that I know of.
You know, I rather think it might be an idea if we went round to the station and had a word with them ourselves. We may be able to give them some lead or other. What do you think?
Oh, I think it's an excellent idea, Mr. Hart. As a matter of fact, I was hoping you'd suggest it.
Good. We can go straight away. I'll get my hat and coat and join you in the lobby in 10 minutes.
And so it was that the disappearance of Mrs. Renee Ashcroft Regan was confirmed. Mr. Hart repeated his story of the proposed Crawley visit to the police, and that story was accepted. At that time, there was no reason at all why it should not have been. Well, today evidence to the contrary can be seen in the Black Museum. At least a dozen women are reported to the police as missing every week. Renee Ashcroft Regan was only one more female whose name and description had to be distributed to every station in the Metropolitan Police Force's area and printed in the current editions of the Police Gazette. Routine, nothing more. Steady, patient routine. At the Chelsea station, Woman Police Sergeant Carol Henderson, whose duty it was to check through the daily records of missing persons in the area, came up on the case of Mrs. Regan and, as a routine step, paid a visit to the Kensington Hotel for a brief chat with those who had known her best. Naturally enough, the first name on her list was that of Mrs. Agnes Lansbury.
Now, Mrs. Lansbury, if you could just tell me when you last saw Mrs. Regan, what she was wearing, and as much as you can remember of any conversation that may have passed between you on the day of her disappearance.
Mrs. Lansbury could add nothing to what she had already told the police, but nevertheless was most helpful and directed Sergeant Henderson to the room of the much concerned but still charming Mr. James Gerald Hart.
Do sit down, Sergeant.
Thank you, Mr. Hart, but I prefer to stand when I'm on duty.
It's not often one has the pleasure of meeting a lady policeman, but as you wish. If you don't mind, I would...
Oh, not at all. Now, I understand, Mr. Hart, from what Mrs. Lansbury tells me, that you've arranged to meet Mrs. Regan on the day of her disappearance.
That's correct. I was to meet her at 2 o'clock outside the Army and Navy Stores in Victoria Street.
But she didn't show up?
No.
How long did you wait for her, Mr. Hart?
Oh, at least an hour. Close to an hour and a half, I should imagine.
And then?
Well, as you may know, we intended going to Crawley together. Well, when I realized she wasn't coming, I drove down alone.
Oh, I see. Exactly what had you intended going to Crawley for, Mr. Hart?
Well, as a matter of fact, I have an interest in a chemical factory down there. I'm what you might call a research chemist.
Oh, yes?
Mrs. Regan was hoping to purchase some samples of certain plastic fingernails I'm manufacturing.
I see. Well, I think that's all I need from you at the present, Mr. Hart. Thank you for your time and your cooperation.
No trouble at all, Sergeant. I'm most anxious to have this matter cleared up, you understand. Mrs. Regan and I were close friends, and I hate to think that anything may have happened to her.
Quite.
If I can help you in any way, I'll only be too pleased.
That's very kind of you, Mr. Hart, but I think we'll be able to manage. If we need any further information from you, you can rest assured we'll get in touch with you.
Sergeant Henderson returned to the Chelsea police station. She had listened to what had seemed a straightforward story, but there was a doubt nagging at her. Hart's manner had been very obliging and polite, but there had been something about him she didn't like, something that didn't ring true. That something took her to the office of Divisional Inspector Russell White, to whom she expressed her doubts.
So you think it's a bit fishy, eh, Sergeant?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that, sir, but, well, I do think Hart might bear checking up on.
Oh, that's good enough for me. Scotland Yard, please. Criminal Records Office.
Within the hour, the checkup had been made, and the results phoned back to Chelsea. Results that stood by Sergeant Henderson's feminine intuition. According to the records, the plausible Mr. Hart had served 2 sentences for fraud.
Well, there you have it, Sergeant. It appears he's been up twice in the past 10 years.
I can't say it surprises me.
Perhaps not, but I wouldn't let it influence you too much. Just because a man has a record, it doesn't say he knows anything about Mrs. Regan's disappearance.
That's true.
I think at this stage the best thing we can do is to forget about Hart for a while and concentrate on Mrs. Regan herself. Give the newspapers a full description of her and the clothes she was last seen wearing. The usual thing.
All right, I'll get onto it straight away.
Thus did the story of Mrs. Renee Ashcroft Regan's disappearance receive its first coverage in the London newspapers. A close-up photograph and underneath it a full description of the missing woman as she was last seen by Mrs. Lansbury prior to her leaving the hotel for her proposed meeting with James Hart.
Well, that should bring results, Sergeant.
Let's hope so, Inspector.
The jewelry's the thing. Mrs. Lansbury is quite sure she was wearing it when she left the hotel.
She was most emphatic about it.
Good. Every jeweler and hock store proprietor in London's been alerted. If a legitimate sale is attempted, we'll hear of it.
2 days passed. No information was received by the police. Then, on the 3rd day, word came through that a Persian lamb coat very similar to the one worn by Mrs. Regan at the time of her disappearance had been found in a cleaner's shop near Crawley. It was later identified by Agnes Lansbury and then brought to the Chelsea police station for analysis. Laboratory tests, however, failed to uncover any further leads.
Nothing more, Inspector?
I'm afraid not. Pity it went through the wash before it was noticed.
Yes.
Still, I suppose we shouldn't complain. At least we know now, without a shadow of doubt, that something has happened to Mrs. Regan.
And also that it happened somewhere in the vicinity of Crawley, which is where she was supposed to have been going with Hart.
A further 2 days passed. Then came the information that Inspector White had been waiting for. A report was received that jewelry fitting the description issued by the police and newspapers had been offered for sale to the proprietor of a second-hand store in Horsham. It was also identified by Mrs. Lansbury as belonging to the missing Mrs. Regan. Proprietor Sally Jacobs was questioned by Inspector White.
Just how long have you been holding this jewelry, Mr. Jacobs?
1 week tomorrow. Party brought it in just after lunch.
Well, that fits. And this party gave his name as Jones, you say?
Well, here's the ticket. John Jones.
You couldn't give us a description of him, I don't suppose?
Well, so let me be remembering like he was short, stocky, with a dark hair, and, well, I'm not quite sure, but I think he had a small moustache.
A small moustache. Anything else?
Well, not that I can bring to mind, no.
Yes. Well, it just so happens, Mr. Jacobs, I have a few photographs in my pocket of men who could fit the description you've given me. I wonder if you'll take a look at them.
Well, what have I to lose?
What about this one?
No.
This?
No, that's nothing like it.
How about this one? Well?
Aye, that's him.
You're sure of that?
As sure as I'm standing here. I never forget a fight.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. You've been very helpful.
Returning to the Chelsea police station, Inspector White summoned Sergeant Henderson to his office. Bringing her up to date on his visit to Horsham, he produced the photograph that had been recognized by Jacobs.
James Gerald Hart.
As he was when arrested in 1939 for fraud.
Hasn't changed much.
Fortunately for us.
Going to pull him in?
All in good time. If he's done away with Mrs. Regan, as facts seem to indicate, he must have deposited her body somewhere.
His chemical factory.
Well, that's as good a place to start looking as any. Tell Peters and Cunningham to stand by. We'll pick up Hart on the way down.
20 minutes later, Inspector White, accompanied by Sergeant Henderson, arrived at the Kensington Hotel and asked for Mr. Hart. That smiling gentleman, as smooth and suave as ever, came downstairs immediately, greeting the sergeant with an airy wave of his hand.
Good afternoon, Sergeant. I was hoping you'd call again.
Oh?
Yes. I've been rather anxious to hear what progress has been made in the search for Mrs. Regan.
Perhaps you better ask Inspector White here that question. He's taken over the handling of the case.
Oh? How do you do, Inspector? Mr. Hart. Before I answer your questions, Mr. Hart, I've a few I'd like you to answer for me.
By all means, fire away.
Sergeant Henderson tells me that you have an interest in a certain chemical factory at Crawley.
That's correct.
And that you arranged to take Mrs. Regan there on the afternoon of her disappearance. Yes. We'd rather like to look over this factory if it can be managed. Just routine, you understand? Of course. Any time, Inspector. Will tomorrow morning suit you? Hardly, Mr. Hart. It'll have to be this afternoon. Well, I'm not sure that would be convenient, Inspector. You see, I have a business appointment in Chelsea at 3, and then I'm afraid your business appointment will have to wait, Mr. Hart. But, Inspector... Let's be on our way, shall we? I've a car waiting outside.
For a fleeting second, the ever-present smile almost faded from the lips of James Hart. Then it broadened, and his perfect white teeth flashed in the sunlight streaming through a lobby window.
Lead on, Inspector.
Little was said during the trip down to Crawley. In the back seat of the police car on either side of Hart, Inspector White and Sergeant Henderson interested themselves in the swiftly passing countryside, and in the front, Constable Rex Peters sat grimly at the wheel, and beside him, equally as grim-faced, sat Sergeant Dennis Cunningham. The silence appeared to amuse Mr. Hart, who chuckled audibly to himself more than once, before remarking casually,
Lovely spot, Crawley, don't you agree, Inspector? Huh? Oh, yes, indeed. I've often thought how very pleasant it would be to live down here. Oh, next turning to the right, Constable.
A few minutes later, the police car came to a standstill outside the Hart Chemical Factory, which proved to be little more than a glorified workshop fitted up as a laboratory. Hart remained in the car under the watchful eyes of Peters and Cunningham while the inspector and Sergeant Henderson entered the wooden building.
Well, plenty of experimental equipment lying about.
Nothing much else as far as I can see.
No.
Certainly no corpus delicti.
Hold on. What's in those drums over there?
Looks like some kind of oil.
Yes. Oil be hanged. It's acid.
Drums of acid in a laboratory. Nothing very odd about that, unless that acid happens to contain the undissolved remains of a human body.
Acid. Just the thing to decompose a corpse without leaving any trace.
Exactly, Sergeant. But in this case, I think it may have left traces. Look, floating on the surface.
Looks like a piece of bone.
With particles of flesh still clinging to it. You'd better take a sample of the acid itself. Siphon it out.
Very well, Inspector. There's a jar on the shelf here. I'll use that.
James Gerald Hart made no attempt to deny the accusation of murder that was subsequently leveled at him. On the contrary, knowing the game was up, he admitted his guilt freely, stating that he had first shot Mrs. Regan and deprived her of her clothing and jewelry, then deposited her body in the drum of acid, a sample of which today occupies this position of honor in the Black Museum.
Orson Welles will be back with you in just a moment.
The defense, brilliantly conceived, was, of course, insanity. To strengthen this plea, Hart cheerfully claimed to have done away with no fewer than 9 other victims in a similar fashion to that in which he had disposed of Mrs. Regan. Whether or not this claim was justified will probably never be known. But it is an established fact that at the time of his trial, 5 of those he named as his victims had been missing from their homes for months. They have not been found to this day. However, justified or not, his plea was rejected and he was found guilty of murder in the first degree. His subsequent execution relieved the world of a murder student who set up in practice before taking his diploma. For James Gerald Hart was by no means an accomplished killer. The trail he left behind him bears out that fact. Rather could he be described as a dabbler in the art of dealing death, who dabbled just once too often. And now, until we meet next time in the same place, I tell you another story about the Black Museum. I remain, as always, obediently yours.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London. The Black Museum, a repository of death. Yes, here in the grim stone structure on the Thames which houses Scotland Yard is a warehouse of homicide, where everyday objects, a kitchen knife, a roller skate, a violin string, all are touched by murder. Here's a .32 caliber bullet. It's a familiar object. Brass cartridge case, snub-leaden nose. Not very pretty to look at.
Interesting, this bullet, Sergeant. Notice the back of the cartridge case?
Yes, sir. It's for a centerfire weapon. The firing pin of the pistol must strike the center of the cartridge.
Right. But the weapon in which we found this bullet was a rimfire revolver. The firing pin could strike only the edge of the cartridge. That little fact, Sergeant, saved at least one life, I'd say.
Well, today, that centerfire bullet can be seen in the Black Museum.
From the annals of the Criminal Investigation Department of the London Police, we bring you the dramatic stories of the crimes recorded by the objects in Scotland Yard's Gallery of Death, the Black Museum.
Here we are, the Black Museum. Scotland Yard's museum. A museum of murder. Here lies death, so orderly, so well kept, row and row. A macabre record of the violence of many generations, each object in its place, each marked, tagged, carded with name and place and date. Each object in this room enjoyed in its life one supreme moment when the eyes of the world were upon it, and it played its silent part in a case of murder. Now here we are. Here's a jeweled ring, fit for a princess, but born of a mind like the Borgias. Press the jewel, so, and a tiny point licks out, a fang, dripping death. Shake hands with your enemy. Shortly thereafter, he dies. A bathtub. Yes, a bathtub. White, smooth, shining in the dimness. Once a man floated face down in this tub. He slipped or he had been pushed. Was the mark on his skull caused by striking his head as he slipped, or by a blunt weapon? In any case, he drowned. Ah, I see. The .32 caliber bullet. Even here, lying so quietly, so somberly, it's ugly. This object was made for killing. But as a matter of fact, it never did kill. That's the story. It began on a London street. A dark sedan drove slowly into the stream of traffic. There are 3 young men in it. One seems quite a bit younger than the other. Even so, the car continues to cruise along.
You got everything straight, Rod?
Sure. Do you think I'm a goon?
We just want to be sure, kid. That's all. Now, what did we tell you?
I'll stay in the car till you wigwag it's all clear. Then I'll go in with you. Hey, there's a chance to park the old bus.
Okay, kid. Watch the fenders now. Wouldn't want nobody to ask for your license at a time like this, eh?
Maddie, leave him alone.
Sure, Jack, sure. Just kidding him, that's all. What's the matter? You edgy?
Cold as ice, that's me.
Yeah, ice is what we're gonna get. All set. Let's go.
2 young men leave an automobile, stroll up the street, hands in pockets, cigarettes dangling loosely from their mouths. They walk past a busy jewelry store.
Pretty crowded. Maybe we ought to wait.
Could be. No use taking chances.
They stroll a few steps farther on. They turn, start back, quite casually.
Hey, what's the kid doing? Oh, the guy's gone into the store. Come on.
A goon must have thought we made the signal. Got your gun?
What else? Slow down now. In we go. Rod, what's the idea? You wigwagged, didn't you? Never mind. Let's do it.
Right. All right, everybody. This is a hold-up.
Over against that wall. Everybody. These guns are loaded.
No! You don't take my stuff! No!
Shut up, you! Quiet! Anybody talks, I'll give it to him. Rod, grab the junk on the counters.
You there! Stand still!
Drop the button! Rod, the car! Start the engine! Maddie, scram!
Stop them! Leave!
Stay in that storm!
Matty, Jack, the truck. It's double parked. We can't get the car out. We're stuck behind that truck.
Front-footed, kid! That way!
I can't get the car out. I can't.
Come on, Jack!
Keep moving!
Stop you! Stop! Stop! You're the thieves! Stop!
Get out of my way, you!
I've got you! I've got you! Please!
Oh! Now it's in the fire! Run, Maddie!
A man lay dead on the sidewalk. The crowd milled around him. The black sedan stayed in its place. 3 young men disappeared in the teeming streets, disappeared completely and utterly. A few hours later, in a quiet office in Scotland Yard, Inspector Bowers and Detective Sergeant Wood looked at what they had.
Not very much of anything, have we, Sergeant?
No, sir. Descriptions which could be any of 100 men and 2 bullets.
A 45 bullet from the woodwork in the jewelry store, and the 32 which killed that fellow.
With no guns to go with them.
Well, if those boys were smart at all, they've ditched the guns.
Funny, you'd expect a lot more shooting in a thing like that.
They were conserving ammunition. Oh, well, I don't know. Circularize the descriptions, what there is of them. That's about all for the moment.
Yes, sir. 3 men, youngish, white handkerchiefs over
And that was all. Now, where do you start among 8 million people searching for 3 youngish men who may be miles away by now? Well, the answer is you don't start. You wait. You have patience. And sometimes your patience is rewarded. Sometimes sooner than you expect.
This is Wilson, Inspector. He's the cabbie who called in this morning.
Ah, how do you do, Wilson? Sit down.
Thank you, sir. Thanks very much.
Wilson may have something on the jewellery store killing, sir.
Yes, well, let's hear it, Wilson.
Well, sir, I never thought about it till I seen the papers this morning. All about the hold-up and that poor fellow who got himself killed yesterday.
Yes, go on, Wilson.
Well, sir, I was taking my cab along Queensbury Road, you know, about a block from the place where it all happened, when a fellow with a white thing round his neck hops on the running board. I've a fare, so I waves him off. Then I see him go into that big building, the Brook building, I think it is, sir. You know, corner of Queensbury and Maidstone.
Oh, you're certain of this, Wilson?
Oh, yes, sir.
Anything else?
I'm not so sure of this, Inspector, but I think I saw another fellow run in the building after the one what jumped onto my cab.
Oh, very good, Wilson. Well, you may have been quite helpful. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Get your hat, Sergeant. We're going exploring.
The reward of patience. And sooner than expected, but only a bare and vague beginning. This kind of investigation takes long hours and hard work, and endless questions. Up and down the hallways of the large office building, in and out of business offices.
Did you notice any commotion in the hall yesterday around 3 o'clock?
Did a man with a white scarf around his neck take your elevator around 3 o'clock yesterday?
Did you hear any running or anything like that around 3 o'clock yesterday?
On and on, upstairs, downstairs, nothing. No one noticed anything, nothing irregular, no commotion. What was that? Did the porter notice anything?
2 fellows. One of them had a raincoat, I think. Both of them had white rags round their collars, sort of.
Oh, you're sure of this?
Oh, yes, sir. They seemed in a hurry, sort of.
Where did they go?
Which office, you mean?
That's right.
Well, I wouldn't know, sir. They went up the stairs just as I was putting some empty waste cans on the service lift.
Oh, did you see the men again?
Well, now you mention it, yes, sir, I did.
Where?
On the 3rd floor it was. I was taking my mop to the hall. One of them was sort of half sitting on the stair rail. The other fellow was looking out of the hall window that opens onto Queensbury, sir. They didn't have the white rags, sir, but they were the same fellows.
Anything else?
No, sir, not that I remember. Old Pop Saunders might know something, Inspector.
Oh, who's this Saunders?
Oh, he drives a van, sir. Been making deliveries to this place every afternoon for years.
Ah, thank you. Right, well, let's go, Sergeant. Maybe Mr. Saunders does know something. We have your address.
They reached the street outside, just as a large, rather decrepit truck, driven by an equally decrepit elderly man, pulled up to the curbstone.
You Pop Saunders? That's me. Who are you? Sergeant Wood, Scotland Yard. This is Inspector Bowers. Yes? Have I done something?
No, but you may have seen something that'll help us.
Yes, sir.
Were you here at this time yesterday?
Yes, sir. I'm always here. This time of day.
Well, did you notice anyone with a white scarf go into the building? Running, perhaps?
Oh, those two. Yes, sir, I did. Funny thing, they seemed in such a hurry. One of them had a raincoat. They came out later. No scarves and no raincoat.
Now the search is on for a raincoat. Scarves or handkerchiefs can go into pockets, not raincoats. The Brook building swarms with police. Every nook and cranny is inspected. In the cellar, in a dark corner.
This must be it, Inspector. Every other raincoat in the building's accounted for. Not a mark on it. Nothing.
Yeah, try ripping the lining, Sergeant.
Nothing, sir, except the manufacturer's stock tag under the armpit.
Not much, but a little at any rate.
Check the manufacturer. From there to the jobber who bought the lot in which that coat was packed. From the jobber to the retailer.
It's times like this I thank heaven for rationing. At least they have to keep a record of the clothing coupons and the names of everyone who buys anything.
A thin, tenuous trail and a mountain of sales slips to go through. But nothing strikes a chord of memory. And then the sergeant thinks of something.
Inspector, when they make out these records, don't they write the last names first?
Yeah, you're right. They do. Oh, well, back over it again. Here, how about this, Sergeant? Mac Stanley. The other way, Stanley Mac. Remember that name, Sergeant?
Stanley Mac. Not a usual name. Yes, sir, I do. Didn't he testify at a trial about 2 years ago?
He did. The trial of Jack Georgeston. He was sent away for armed robbery. First offense. Light sentence. Pal Georgeston ought to be out by now. All right, let's get his dossier over here, Sergeant, and then invite him in for a talk. It may be interesting, if nothing else.
Well, today that center fire bullet can be seen in the Black Museum. It was a long chance. One man buys a raincoat. This man happens to be a witness at another man's trial. The defendant is sent to prison for armed robbery under circumstances similar to the case under investigation. The inspector in charge sends for the convicted man's dossier and finds.
Well, so Jack Georgeston was released from prison 6 days before the Queensbury killing. Well, let's have the young man into the yard, shall we, Sergeant? You'll be able to find him easily enough, I think. If not, we can suspect flight because of guilt, can't we? Send a pickup order out for him.
Jack Georgeston was found. Found quite easily in London.
Look, you haven't a thing on me, Inspector, and you know it.
Maybe, maybe not. Sergeant, show Mr. Georgeston the garment.
Here it is, Georgeston. Do you recognize it?
There's a million raincoats like that.
Yes, but not bought by Stanley Mac.
That coat.
You know it?
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't have nothing against the rain last week when I got out, so Stan gave me the coat.
Oh, where did you lose it?
I didn't lose it. I never lost nothing, except a little time recently.
Yeah, we know about that.
I figured you did.
Keep a civil tongue in your head, Georgeston, understand?
Okay. Okay, I said.
Right, now, since you didn't lose this raincoat, how is it that we found it?
I loaned it to a fella. How should I know what he did with it?
Oh, who had it?
I don't remember.
No. You receive a raincoat as a gift against the rain. Within a matter of days, you loan it to someone, but you don't remember to whom.
That's right. I don't remember.
You try him, Sergeant.
Yes, sir. Speak up, man. Who had that coat?
I don't remember.
Well, maybe I can refresh your memory. The coat's hooked up with a murder. Now, who had it?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
That was the refrain. I don't remember. Nor could they make him remember. Finally, they let him go. There was nothing to hold him on. But Inspector Bowers said,
I want a tail on him, Sergeant. 24 hours a day. We'll pick up his friends one by one and see where he leads us.
One of those friends was a boy named Rodney Hamilton.
Let me alone. I never did nothing.
How old are you, Hamilton?
17, and you got no right.
Now, we happen to know that you've been away to a reform school, Hamilton. You were caught snatching ladies' purses 2 years ago.
So what? I did me time.
You don't keep very good company, son. Georgeston has been out of prison about a week.
Well, we like each other. I'll pick me own friends.
Where were you day before yesterday, about 2:30 in the afternoon?
Home, in bed.
Ah, sleeping late, huh?
Well, I was sick. Had a fever.
We can check that, you know.
Go ahead, check it. I was at home in bed. All afternoon, all morning, and all night. I was sick.
Yes, we know. You said that before. Now, look here.
But it didn't do any good. The boy was obviously afraid, but whether of the police or of the men he knew, it was impossible to tell. Still, the patience of Scotland Yard was rewarded once again. A report came in from detectives assigned to follow both Georgeston and Hamilton that they'd been present at a party in a bar given by a third young man named Matty Canvas.
Dossier on Canvas, Inspector.
Ah, thank you. Oh, nice lad. Stole a car when he was 11. Convicted, assault with intent to rob. Convicted, jewel robbery. Convicted, armed robbery and assault. Nice little trio, our three friends, aren't they, Sergeant?
Not exactly. Do you want Canvas brought in, sir?
Yes, do that. Oh, and, Sergeant, bring the other two along, but keep them separated. Don't let any one of them know that we have the other two.
Nothing highly dramatic, merely routine, Scotland Yard routine, recognizable as standard practice by any policeman in any large city. Bring him in for questioning. But it always helps to have a few facts on which to base the questions. With this in mind, and knowing their underworld, Inspector Bowers and Sergeant Wood repaired to that certain bar where Matty Canvas held parties for his friends.
Nothing much here.
Well, there may be. Keep your ears open. Another pint of ale, please.
Right you are, sir.
Oh, here now, Larry, let me wait on the gentleman.
Suit yourself, Miguel, suit yourself.
Oh, well, down the hatch.
Right.
Patience. Frequent the bar. Wait. Keep your ears open. Don't talk. Just wait.
Say, Larry, you hear they picked up Matty?
Yeah, and the other two.
Rod, too? That kid?
Well, I, for one, ain't sorry. Gives the place a bad name, having kids around with guns in their pockets.
Not bright.
Canvas ain't bright, that's for sure. Lets himself get bunked out of 5,000 quid's worth of stuff. Gets mad and works the kid like that there Rod.
Oh, well, so it goes, I will say.
Another couple of pints, please, miss.
Oh, yeah, sure. There you are.
Do you know a lad named Canvas?
Me? I don't know nobody.
How about a kid named Hamilton?
You think I'll keep track of everybody comes in here?
Yeah, that would be difficult. I thought I heard you mention Mr. Canvas by name. So did my friend here.
Then you thought wrong.
We don't encourage conversation with the elder.
No, I don't suppose you do. Care to have a drink on us?
I'm not certain that I drinks with cops, mister.
More routine ahead. More routine for the inspector and the sergeant after they left the bar. They checked descriptions of the men seen at holdups and robberies prior by some months to the tragedy in Queensbury Street. In one case, a description tallied with Matty Canvas. Mr. Canvas was invited out of his cell and into the inspector's office.
All right, Canvas. You've been identified on the Davis job. You'll do a good long stretch for that. You may as well tell us what you know about the Queensbury shooting.
I don't know nothing.
Turn King's evidence, Canvas, and you'll get off easily. Otherwise, it's a hanging matter.
You can't pin that one on me. I was miles away. I can prove it.
I suppose I told you the kid's been talking his head off.
Rod? Talk? Not in your life. He's too scared somebody will cut his liver out.
Oh, all right, Canvas, if that's the way you want it. Take him back, Sergeant. We'll give him plenty of time to think.
No luck with Georgetown either. But the kid, there was a chance he'd break. Just a chance. The inspector took it.
Look, boy, your pals are saying that you held a gun that killed the fellow in the Queensbury hold-up.
I never had a gun.
Maybe they're framing you, lad. After all, you're pretty young, 17. You won't hang. They will. So naturally, they say it was you.
I didn't. I never touched the guns.
Canvas says you did, that you had the 32 all the time.
I never did. They can't say it. They can't.
But they do. Both of them told me. Looks to us like they got together to put the job on you.
Well, why shouldn't they? They might have to die.
There were only 2 guns. They had them. You've got to believe that. You've got to.
We don't have to believe anything except evidence.
If you had the guns, if I told you where they were, I said it. I didn't mean to talk. I did.
Keep talking, lad. It's the only way to save your neck.
My neck?
If you held that gun and pulled that trigger...
All right, we threw the guns away, both of them. The 45 Matty had and the 32 Jack had. We threw them in the river from the quay at the Lancashire Wharf. If you can find them, you'll see. Maybe there'll be fingerprints. You've got to find them guns. You gotta!
Ballistic report, Inspector. The 45 fired the bullet we found in the woodwork. The 32 killed the man in the street. And it's funny, half the cartridges in the 32 were rimfire. The other half was centerfire. Those didn't go off. If they had, chances are there'd have been a lot more murder.
And today, if you're interested, you can find that centerfire bullet in a place of honor in the Black Museum.
Orson Welles will be back with you in just a moment.
It's an accepted fact in police work that 80% of the occupants of our prison either were talked there or talked themselves there. In this case, it was patient police routine plus the talking of young Rod Hamilton, which put Rod behind bars for the rest of his life and brought Georgetown and Canvas to the 13 steps and the rope one morning at 8 o'clock. There's a postscript to this story. The use of a gun by an English criminal is rare. Nor in England do the police go armed in their normal course of duty. The Hamilton case was one of the more obvious symptoms of a post-war disease of violence. The death of Georgetown and Canvas was not without its effect on this disease. For days, weeks, and even months after their execution, pistols, guns, knives, many of them perhaps innocent wartime souvenirs, others of more dubious origin, were found by the police on rubbish heaps, disused gardens, on the mudbanks of the River Thames. The criminal world of London had come to terms with their traditional enemies at Scotland Yard. And perhaps, after all, the innocent man had not died in vain. The bullet that killed him, the centerfire bullet, remains in its customary place in the Black Museum. And now, until we meet next time in the same place, I tell you another story about the Black Museum. I remain, as always, obediently yours.